It is one of the greatest precursors to sickness, to volatility, to disharmony, to discontent.
Every problem anybody has, as far as I'm concerned, belongs to the idea of themselves.
If I can see, wow, the reason my relationship doesn't work, the reason I have a health issue, the reason I don't seem to get acknowledged in the workplace or make the money I feel I deserve is because I feel fundamentally somehow inadequate. And then to ask yourself, if you don't take care of what's going on in the subconscious of people's minds, at best, the term I use is you're going to be the greatest version of your limited self. Now, if you really get that statement, it's very profound, right? So you're stuck within the parameters of your blind spots, right? These beliefs of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity, which to me are universal, they're primal, they're very deep. Then we develop survival mechanisms, adaptations, compensations. And then on top of that, our physiology is going to, just by natural cascade, reflect whatever's going on internally, which is, as you know, as a doctor, usually a mild state of fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, that whole storm of hormones that really is doing us a disservice. It's affecting people's sleep and weight gain. All of the things that people are dealing symptomatically on the surface, to me, are a byproduct of the fact that human beings currently are designed to survive. Everything is a potential perceived threat, whether it's being what your boss is going to say or your spouse is going to say or your parents are going to say, or am I going to be able to pay rent, or am I going to be okay in the future? Am I going to realize my dreams? Am I ever going to quit smoking? Am I ever going to lose weight? All of these sort of unanswerable questions inspire this internal sort of fight and battle that people have, that to me is the dis-ease, the absence of ease, that then manifests over time into some physical symptoms. So that's why I get super passionate about this, because you can do all the work externally and it's not a knock on your industry. And thank God you listen, and that's why you're making the difference you are. Because if you don't address what's going on mentally and emotionally for somebody, at best, you're just making the window dressing look good while the back of the shop is just on fire.
And I guess, we are in prime territory for that, aren't we? We're in the heart of Santa Monica, which is, potentially the wellness capital of the world. And there's a lot of people walking around here who look good.
Looking good is definitely one of the greatest products of this town.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't mean that they're not good on the inside, but I would bet that many of them have sacrificed their inner sense of well-being and satisfaction in that external pursuit of what they consider to be physical health.
Yes. Yeah, well, because human beings are designed fundamentally, as far as I'm concerned, to be loved and accepted. We're seeking belonging. This is just this primal universal psychology. We want to fit in. So one of the means by which we believe we fit in is based on our appearance, right? So for the man to sort of, as a stereotypical archetype of a man, is to be strong and to be fast and nowadays to be wealthy. And for the woman is really to be beautiful and pretty and sexy. And you see this just on Instagram accounts, how many guys are there with their shirts off and how many women are there displaying, their latest bikini outfit for the umpteenth time. So none of it's wrong, but if you understand what are the underlying motivators, it's really a human being individualized, thinking that they are separate and that their ultimate accomplishment is to feel love and acceptance from their environment. What most people don't understand is if I'm seeking love and acceptance from others, what I'm actually saying and reinforcing is that I'm not loved and accepted inherently. And therein lies the survival, the disease, and the exhaustion that people are dealing with. So it's cliche, but what I'm helping people find is complete comfort in their own skin, total self-love and acceptance. And that to me is real health and real success.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. It's interesting that sometimes when I talk about these topics on this podcast, it's not quite the same thing, but I spoke to Gabor Mate a little while ago. I don't know if you know Gabor's work, but it's
absolutely.
I'm sort of a big fan of Gabor and what he's doing. These things for many people can be quite challenging. Most people, I think, loved that podcast. Some people didn't. I think my perception on that would be that sometimes things are too close to the bone that we're not ready to hear. I know there would have been various stages in my life where I possibly couldn't hear that. But and that's what evolution is, right? That's how we change, depending on life experiences. But I do agree with you that the health of your mind, your subconscious mind in particular, is critical for, even if what we think we're looking for is physical well-being, I don't really think you can have physical well-being without that mental well-being. I'm not sure it's possible. No. And, I was telling you just before we started this, so obviously you've been out here for a number of years. My first TV series, Doctor in the House, when I went to live alongside people who had chronic illness, chronic complaints that usually they were under their GP and often a specialist as well.
Right.
They were on multiple medications, yet they were still not doing well, which is why they wanted help. I have reflected so much on what I managed to help these patients achieve, which is pretty much get all of them better, some completely better, some significantly better. One of the ladies was on 20 pills a day. She had 8 diagnoses. She couldn't work anymore. She couldn't be with her family. She'd been to specialists. In 6 weeks, I got her pain-free and reduced her medication down significantly. And 2 years on now, she's on 0 medication.
Amazing.
Right? And I've reflected on, no matter what the condition was, whether it was type 2 diabetes, whether it was fibromyalgia, whether it was anxiety, whether it was sleep problems, relationship problems, hormonal issues, actually, what did I do? Yes, I addressed 4 core areas of their lifestyle: food, movement, but equally important, sleep and relaxation. But I realized the ones who really owned their problem and broke free from it were the ones where the mental outlook changed, when there was a shift. So what intrigues me is that you mentioned the subconscious mind. Okay, so there will probably be people listening to this who are thinking, well, I know my own mind, right? I know what I think. What does Peter mean when he talks about the subconscious mind?
Okay, great question. I just want to, on the coattails of what you shared, just a couple of bits of feedback. You said, it's a real shift in perspective. And one of my quotes, which I think sets a nice context for what we're about to talk to, is by Marcel Proust. And he said that the journey of true discovery lies not in finding new lands, but in looking through new eyes. So it's one of my favorite quotes, because really my work is about shifting perspective. Because there's a quote, I think it was by Wayne Dyer, but he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Right? And we could get into quantum physics and the observer effect, et cetera, et cetera. So subconscious mind to me is sorts of, as human beings, we've got different levels of programming, we could say, right? Now everybody knows about the genome, or if they don't know about the genome, they certainly know about chromosomes or DNA. Everybody's heard about DNA. Nobody is going to be on the streets going, you know what, my eyes like yours are very dark brown. Mine are light blue or gray. We can't go, you know what, tomorrow or over the weekend, I'm going to shift my eye color. Most people would think that was preposterous, right? They understand. Yet that expression is because of the way that your code or your DNA is expressing itself physiologically, right? Your height, I mean, you're like, what, 6'5", 6'6"?
6'6.5", yeah.
Right, okay. Now, that wasn't your choice, right? That is by virtue of the DNA. I'm 6'3" and a bit of change, right? So that's one part that people understand. Then there's different tiers of conditioning. You could argue at the more superficial level, somebody who walks into a coffee shop, one of the parts of their conditioning is somebody goes for, a cappuccino, but somebody goes for a chai latte. It's more superficial and they get to change that more readily. They might go, I'm with somebody and they actually don't drink coffee, so I'm going to have a mint tea because out of respect or something. So that was a relatively easy change. So we can start to see there's this hierarchy of programming, but it's a form of conditioning. So much closer to the DNA, I would say the subconscious is deep programming that I would assert is both universal and it's primal, meaning there is this survival instinct of a human being. And so those codes, which to me exist in language, were formed in our childhood. So the first time that you found out that not being you was not enough, right? So for a baby isn't conscious of what are you thinking about me? There's not that self-concern or worry for what other people's interpretation is of your behavior. So a baby will literally being held, they've been fed, and they'll throw up down someone's back because it's just what they're doing. They're like, oh God, I look like an idiot. Right? And they don't care if the dress is a Gucci. None of that has been installed into their programming of these social norms and how you're supposed to behave or be polite. So, but the first time when we're young, usually, around 1.5, 2, 3, when we can understand words, maybe we get scolded a little bit. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be just, hey, stop that. That's bad. Or you did that wrong. And there's this first sense of being me is no longer enough. I now have to behave in a certain way in order to keep getting the love, the support, the security of my archetypes of male and female, which is mum and dad, usually. And so that's when we start to create our subconscious patterns of like, oh, I have to act in a certain way in order to stay part of this tribe called my family, or it could be a community, it could be my school. And so now we start to get slowly programmed. Now, training the subconscious is amazing because when a baby starts to walk, obviously it doesn't come out of the womb and it's like running like, Usain Bolt. It takes a minute to develop the central nervous system. But you fall over, you get up, you figure it out, and eventually, by 1 year, 1.5, you can walk pretty convincingly, right? So, but that's now all conditioned. You don't have to every morning when you're 30 or 40 or 50 get out of bed and go, oh, shit, I forgot how to walk. I've got to figure that out again. It's already programmed. So certain parts of the subconscious, which are deep code, are incredibly useful. Where we get tripped up and where my work comes in and is pivotal is what are the deep-seated programs that they're self-critical, where I feel that I'm not enough, or I feel that I'm not loved, or I feel that I'm not worth anything. These are these insidious pieces of program that people will adapt to. So somebody, for example, who thinks they're not enough might become the perfectionist. Somebody who thinks they're not valuable could become a people pleaser. And then they wonder why they're exhausted or they're never quite accomplishing what they want in life, because the actual energetics, the frequency, without getting too esoteric, the vibration they're functioning from is the precursor to their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors, and then their actions. There's a natural cascade. So if I live in a world, a sort of a mental prison of I'm not enough, then what I might think is, well, don't mess this up, right? I might be conscious of my thought. Like you said, well, people will say they know their mind. I would assert what you're aware of, conscious thinking, is not what I'm pointing to. Conscious thinking arises out of subconscious programming. So somebody who fundamentally, meaning at the deepest level, thinks they're not enough, what they might think about is, oh, there's an attractive person over there, a guy or a girl, and I want to go over there, but why would I? They're not going to be interested in me. That might be their conscious thought quietly to themselves, but it arises from a deeper feeling of they're not worth it. So then the actions they take are, in this case, inaction, and so they get the results, which is they go home alone and they can't find someone again. Or conversely, we adapt to it, right? And we develop courage, or we try to force our way through it, but we might be nervous. We get physiological responses, damp hands, we start sweating, we go into that fight or flight response, which again is an indicator that I'm coming from a place of inadequacy and fear. Yeah. So I could go on about this obviously for hours because it's very profound. I was telling you, I was doing a podcast 2-3 days ago with this amazing Australian guy, very smart, traveled the world, done a lot of work on himself. He was sitting there with incredibly, like almost scarlet red rashes around his eyes. Like a dermatologist, I'm not sure it's rosacea, it was almost a form of psoriasis. But even looking at him, it would sort of inspire someone to want to scratch their eyes. It just looks so irritating. So halfway through the interview, God bless him, he said, I know you obviously understand the power of the mind and how it influences our health and physiology, but you're also an Ayurvedic practitioner. What would you say about what's going on with my eyes? So I said, well, I explained from an Ayurvedic perspective, the excess heat. He's a Pitta type, meaning fire type. And I said, there's obviously a bit of toxicity in your blood. It affects your eyes, your liver, where the Pitta sits inside of our body. Pitta is Pitta for anyone who doesn't really know what Ayurveda is. But it's basically heat. So he could relate to that, and some of the things he was doing in terms of food and the stress and alcohol, spicy foods all contribute to that heat in our body. But I said, the thing that I'm picking up most is the emotions. And he said, go on. I said, well, do you want me to go there? Because this might be a bit uncomfortable, to your point about sometimes you've got to use a bit of tough love. And he said, no, I'm open. I said, well, what I see is there's a lot of hurt in you. You're a very sensitive guy. But he was built like it's almost a bit of a compensation, you know, the sort of quintessential scrawny kid who becomes a bodybuilder. Not to that extreme, but there was an element of that involved here. And I said, you've clearly been hurt. Well, first of all, you're human. Welcome to the game. But I can see that you've protected yourself. And one of the ways you protect yourself is anger. So when people get angry, usually it's a survival mechanism against being hurt. If a dog's been hit too many times and you go near it with a hand to stroke it and it growls, it's not that it's a bad dog, it's just collapsing past conditioning with a potential threat. And now it's protecting itself. Does that make sense?
100%, yeah.
So what he realized, and then he started talking about his childhood, and it's all on a podcast anyway, so he's going to be airing everything. But he's talking about his parents separated when he was very young and the impact that had on him. And he was talking about how when he grew up, he never wanted to mess up like that. He wanted to get it right. And you could feel the pressure in the fact that he's wanting to avoid what he'd been through. So basically, like most people, he's literally trying to avoid his history, which is impossible and futile. But in that energetics, there's also a massive judgment of his history. He's saying what happened was wrong and bad. So now he's collecting all of this judgment. Judgment is like friction, which creates more heat. So anyway, I broke down the whole thing, got him to completely reconcile and accept his history. There were a lot of tears, which was so powerful for the cameras. You know, it makes for great TV, but it's also very moving for his audience. And so that was that, some tears. Anyway, he texted me, that was about 4:00 in the afternoon, 3:00. He went to dinner. He said, this is unbelievable, but to me it was totally physics. He said, I've come back. He said, it's not completely gone, but it's about 50% already. Then I saw him the next morning because he wanted to come and just meet somebody who works with me at my house. And it was probably down to about 10, 15% of what it was previously. Now, that to me looks like magic, and some people may even question it. But from my perspective, that is shifting the subconscious, releasing a lot of deep trauma and emotional harm and hurt that's been trapped. And letting that go is one of the most liberating experiences anyone can have. And immediately the cascade will affect your physiology, whatever your dis-ease is.
I mean, Peter, I love that story. I totally, I don't question it at all, actually. I have seen time and time again surprises, or what the convention would regard as surprises, when looking at people, when helping people, when helping patients. I do think modern medicine gets a bad rap. I agree with you that modern medicine is doing what it is meant to do, which is be very good at acute disease.
Yeah.
Frankly, I can say this with a lot more courage than I could have done a few years ago, but we are way off track when it comes to chronic disease.
Yeah.
And again, why could I not have said that 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't secure enough in myself. Yeah. I had my own insecurity issues.
Absolutely.
And as I peel those layers of the onion away, it's like you said, you mentioned prison. When you're living in that prison, I feel free these days. And
it's my number one product, freedom.
Yeah, and who doesn't want that?
The funny thing is a lot of people don't know it.
They don't know it, and they don't know that.
And that's the pushback.
What
are you talking about? I'm free. I'm like, you're not. No, nobody is. And that's okay, but there's degrees of freedom. Like I use a sliding scale from fear to freedom. You know, one of my quotes that I've got picked up on a lot, and actually our dear friend Drew, who introduced us, a lot of people recycled the quote that I use quotes. It's how I write. And that's going to be the format of my book. And I'll expand on the quotes. But anyway, one of the things I said a couple of times during the interview with Drew was, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. Meaning, if you get triggered by anything, and triggered, all I'm saying is you get upset, you get pissed off, you get scared, wherever there's some kind of emotional response to external stimulus, person or event, that is showing where you're not okay with the situation. I'm not okay with the situation means I'm scared at some level. I feel threatened. When you're not threatened, you're at peace. And that's so freedom and peace and vitality. These are all my gifts to people, not because I have them to give. I would never have that audacity. But I do have the gift to remove what's in the way of them being exposed as our inherent nature. Now, that's a powerful thing for people to understand. I make the distinction between that which is inherent versus that which is inherited. So the codes, the programs I was talking about in the subconscious, and then all the behavioral adaptations, they're on top of the freedom that already exists, which is your birthright. I'm revealing that, and to me, there is no greater gift a human being can experience.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I'm actually tingling hearing you describe that because it is the deepest truth.
Yeah.
And
thank you for the reflection.
It is one that, you know, we could go down this path in many ways, but it is one of those things, isn't it, where human beings often need to be presented with adversity before they start going down this journey.
Absolutely.
For me, listeners have heard me talk about this before, but one of the most significant moments in my life was when my father died 6.5 years ago. And my whole adult life, I moved back to where I grew up to help look after dad with my mum and my brother.
Beautiful.
So I could care for many years.
Yeah.
And, you know, when dad died, although it was the best thing, there's no question my dad was suffering and it was the best thing.
Yeah.
You know, I suddenly had time.
Right.
Time was something I never had before because I was so busy 7 days a week.
Yeah.
You know, 12 months a year, you know, not a day off, phones on 24 hours a day in case there's going to be a call. Dad's fallen. Can you come around, pick him up? You know, so I was living in a heightened fight or flight state at all times, basically.
Yeah.
And that is also reflected in some of my behavior around that in terms of what I would do to unwind.
Yeah.
But going down this journey has revealed so much to me. So you mentioned this idea of perfectionism.
Yeah.
So my whole life, I've probably been a perfectionist.
I can see that.
Yeah. And I'm interested, you know, it is powerful, but you can probably unpack bits of my behavior by the language I'm using.
Yeah.
But, and I'm very open to doing that.
Great.
But I have been a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And I think it's driven me to do certain things well, but it's also stopped me from doing other things when I felt I couldn't conquer them and be perfect. It's caused undue delay in doing things.
Yeah.
And then one small part of that, as I was going through some inner work with someone who now is a very good friend of mine, you know, we were doing something called IFS, Internal Family Systems. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but this thing popped into my head when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about this in 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And I was taken back to secondary school. So I went to Manchester Grammar School, this big school, about 1,200 students.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, I think my friends deserted me, like who I thought were my friends.
Yeah.
I think they just went off and kind of chucked me.
Right.
And I was really upset.
Yeah.
I think I was crying.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm miles away from home. I'm in this big school.
Yeah.
And I sort of go back to my classroom and I sort of morphed into another group of friends.
Yeah.
And this came back so clearly. So I had not consciously thought about this in 20 plus years.
Hence subconscious. Yeah.
But it was clear as day in my subconscious. And when I went through a process that allowed that to start revealing itself, it came up.
Amazing.
So there's a lot more to it. But
yeah.
suddenly, so many aspects of my life became clear. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I get it now. You are scared of being rejected. You feel that at any point, somebody could desert you and leave you. So my response is to go above and beyond what I should do. Be the perfect friend. Never say what I want.
Yeah.
Be at university with your mates and like, where should we go? You know, which bar, which restaurant? Hey guys, you choose. I'm cool. Wherever you go. You go somewhere you can't stand. You're there. There's nothing on the menu you want. But hey, you know what? You know, Rongan's cool. He's like, he'll do whatever everyone wants.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a part of my personality.
Yes.
But it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was programming, because now that I've cleared that, I still have tendencies towards it.
For sure.
But I would estimate that they are maybe 10% of what they were.
Yeah.
And it feels freeing. It feels amazing
Yes.
to be yourself.
Yes.
So that's one experience I want to share with you.
Amazing.
And I'd love your view on that. The other
Yeah.
one, it happened just a couple of days ago. So I've just spent 2 days in Santa Rosa with Professor BJ Fogg, who is, he's probably regarded as the world's leading researcher in human behavior.
Okay.
His work's incredible. And I spent 2 days at a boot camp with him.
Yeah.
And with one of the other attendees, when it had finished, we were all out for dinner. We were chatting about our own stories, and I was telling him about some of this personal work that I'd been on, and he was sharing his stories. And then I said, guys, you know what's really interesting for me? With my work, I have been away at various times over the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I come to America for a week to do conferences, and I used to always feel guilty.
Right.
I'd be here, and I'd be thinking, I've left my wife, my kids, I feel guilty. I'd be phoning a lot. There's nothing inherently wrong with phoning. But now that I've sort of moved beyond it, I can look back and go, you know what? I was not at ease. I wasn't fully present in what I was doing here.
Yeah.
Half of me wanted to be back home.
Yeah.
And I didn't consciously do this, but this time I've not felt that.
Right.
I feel very present and very okay with being here.
Yeah.
I love phoning and chatting and FaceTiming my kids and my wife.
Of course.
There's no emotional charge there like there used to be.
Yeah, yeah.
So I feel like I have shed more layers. I feel that I have grown and that I'm becoming more present. What does Peter Crone, the Mind Architect, think?
I think, first of all, it's amazing. It's a beautiful gift, both, to your audience listening, because people will get something I don't know if you've shared some of this before, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but not all of it. And I hope so. No. That's why I share.
Yeah. So that's beautiful. I think it's amazing for you, obviously. It's very liberating is what I hear, right? There's this sense of freedom. There's this epiphanies that you've had, or at least two significantly.
There's way more. There's way more, but that's just two.
For the two that you shared, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a gift to your children. Because, these tendencies are inherited, right? I often say kids will rarely succeed at listening to you, to the parents, but they will always succeed at becoming you. And so if your energetics in the way that you behave, the way that you speak, the belief systems that you have, they will adopt them by virtue of the fact that as humans, we want to, as I said earlier, belong. We want to be loved and accepted. So just as you were using the perfect example of you going to a bar or at college, you would acquiesce your own personal desires in order to be able to feel you belong and fit into the gang. Why? Because as human beings looking through the lens of separation, we are most scared of not being part of the tribe, because fundamentally these universal principles, if you are kicked out of the gang, so to speak, with our primal DNA, you don't survive because you're out in the wilderness. Now, it may not make any sense today in our sort of urban living, but it's still deep in our DNA and our conditioning. So it's a gift to your kids. It's a gift to your friends. It's a gift to your patients. What I hear, if I can throw in what I hear that might nudge you a little bit more towards freedom, is if we take that 12-year-old boy who thinks his friends have chucked him away, which is a horrible feeling, right? And it buys right into what a human being is already scared of, which is isolation or separation. So that was your experience, right? Literally, you're feeling, quote unquote, alone. And it's a horrible feeling. Now, I would also collapse both of those experiences, the one you had with the doctor, but the one you went through with the IFS or whatever it's called. Yeah. So I would say they both arose at the same time. Because as a 12-year-old, you've got a certain degree of mental capacity. You're obviously sharp. So when your friends, quote unquote, chuck you or abandon you, that's how it occurred to you. That's what seemed to happen. In reality, what happened was you were standing where you were standing and they weren't there. That's the physics of it, right? So we start to uncollapse, the event and the emotion associated with it. So my assertion, without knowing it, but you can reflect it as a truth or not, is at that moment, your brain, because it's designed to predict and protect, probably made the assumption that not only had they gone, but you must have done something wrong in order for them to leave, because otherwise there's no logic for them to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. So now we get into this realm of you always wanting to do something to make sure that people aren't inconvenienced by you. I would put it in the language, well, I'm going to ask you actually, what does that kid think about himself if everybody's left? What's how does he occur for himself? How does he define himself? If everyone's gone and left you, what does that say about you?
It says many things. On one level, it says, I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
It says that if I am the way I am, that is not enough for those people. So I have to change the way I am so that I am enough for those people.
That's the compensation. So you're close with the worthiness. And I'm not denying there's a component of that, but energetically and intuitively, what I actually hear is something a little different. If you discard something, what are you saying about that thing or that object or that person? I
don't want it.
Right. So now I want you to consider that moment that little boy felt like he wasn't wanted. Now just feel into that. That's what I'm getting from you. Because you're a very sensitive guy, and knowing your behavioral adaptations that you had, the compensation of people pleasing is, well, I'm not wanted, so I'm going to do what I have to be wanted. Does that resonate?
120%.
Good, because this will be very powerful for you, right? So I can see it already a little bit behind the eyes. So meaning you're very sensitive, you're a 12-year-old, you had friends, and then all of a sudden you've got the experience of, wow, everybody's gone. And so now I feel like I'm discarded, hence I'm not wanted. We could also say I'm not loved. Now, 12-year-old, they're probably not thinking that. It's more the experience of I've just been let go of. So a adult, can maybe compensate in ways that they're like, oh, well, if I, screw it, I didn't like those people anyway, or whatever it might be. And they'll justify it. But for a kid, it's very scary. And so you, at that point, I'm asserting, developed the, I'm a good guy, I'm going to fit in. You even said you molded to another group. So you already at that point started to manipulate who you were in order to compensate for the deeper subconscious belief of who you were, which is you're not wanted. And you morphed in order to be wanted. But now the whole thing is completely inauthentic. It's not who you are, and it's exhausting because you're having to maintain a facade in order to try and compensate for something that you made up. That's the mad part. But we have all the love and compassion for that little boy because he doesn't know. He just feels scared and he feels left alone. So those two things arose as far as I'm concerned. You must have done something wrong for you not to feel wanted. So now you come to America last time and you're driven by both of those mechanisms. So you have to call your wife, you have to call your kids. I get that you love them, but the underlying energetics is this sort of exhausting this forceful approach versus a choice. Oh, I love my wife. I'm just going to call her why? Because I want to. Versus, no, I got to because I've got to make sure I don't do anything wrong and I'm a bad boy. Because if I do something wrong, I get kicked out of the gang and then it fires that feeling of not being wanted. And you're going to do everything you can to avoid that. That's so slippery. Do you see that?
Hey, I absolutely see that. And I think for me, you've hit on a couple of poignant pieces, which are right on.
Yeah.
But then clearly this is what you do. So you can clearly see this by the way people use language. And I can tell, I wonder what our conversation would have been like 2 years ago had we had it. Because I know I was a very different person then. I feel my growth has accelerated exponentially in the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
I think I've been working on myself, I've been shedding layers.
Amazing.
But I really feel it's accelerated recently and it feels great.
Yeah.
I never felt, my wife's incredible. She would never make me feel bad if I didn't call. It wasn't that so much, but it was a guilt. It was a feeling that I'd done something wrong, not for not calling, but for leaving and going to America.
It doesn't matter. You fill in the blank. It doesn't matter.
And I felt I probably had to justify what I was doing on that day.
Yeah.
Whereas like today, I have not, just because I've been podcasting all day, it's not worked out. I've not called my wife.
Right.
And so I won't speak to her today. I've not spoken to the kids. And you know what? I feel totally okay with that.
Well, so you're very bad and wrong.
Hey,
I'm kidding.
No,
I'm sorry.
But genuinely,
No,
I'm kidding. I feel okay with that,
Yeah,
and it feels so freeing.
Yeah.
Because I never would have done.
No.
And now I feel, I love my wife. I love my kids.
Yes,
things
absolutely.
are great. And what this does, as you become free, as you shed these layers, you start to really tap into what presence is. You start to tap into real compassion.
Yeah.
It changes the way. Hey, it changes the way you view other people.
You've discovered, as far as I'm concerned, love, but this time love of self, and that also allows you to have love of others. See, love doesn't have expectation. It doesn't judge. So when you were in the realm of guilt, as you said, which to me, or shame, is a byproduct of thinking you've done something wrong. Guilt and shame can only be the emotional experiences to a psychological belief that we've done something wrong, right? So that was deep ingrained in you from probably about age 12, maybe before. So at that point, again, as I said, you were concerned of doing something wrong, because if you did something wrong, the byproduct, the cost of that was you get, quote unquote, kicked out of the gang. You're not wanted anymore. But what I want you to understand, to deepen this freedom for you, where was the feeling? Who was the one thinking they're not wanted? So where was the actual experience of not being wanted? It looked like it was because your friends left. But
it was in me.
It was in you,
right? It's a story I created.
So follow with me. So where were you born?
I was born in Manchester.
Manchester, great. So if I cut you open, am I going to find a manufacturing label in there that says Rangan was born in Manchester, he's not wanted? Am I going to find that anywhere?
No.
No. Great. So it's not actually part of your quote unquote makeup, but where did it exist? Because it was there. It defined the way that you morphed. It defined your behaviors. So where did it exist?
In my head.
Yes, in your head. And in what form? How does it exist? I'm not wanted. What's its structure? Without getting too smart.
What's its structure?
Yeah.
Words.
Words. Right. Now, stick with me because this is going to be profound. So you're 12, you go through this experience. I have all the love and compassion for that little boy. He felt isolated.
Can I say that, Peter? I suspect that even though that was the incident that came up in my head, I think there were incidents before that. And I think this just echoed the same pattern. It just reinforced the pattern because there was stuff when I was 4, 5, 6, little things.
I guarantee. And I would actually even assert it was way before.
Exactly.
You actually, to me, these are all pre-installed. We arrive with them. And the game of life, this dimension of humanity, is the catalyst for us to be able to reconcile them so that we can be liberated. Now, that's very poetic, but to me, it's also very physical.
I love it. And you call it the game of life. I think about it when people say, or when I reflect on what is the point of life, I feel the point of life is to actually figure out who you are without all these compensations, without all these reflections from other people, from other experiences.
Yeah.
Actually, who am I when you strip all that away?
Yeah.
And I guess we're saying a similar thing in slightly different ways.
Yes. That to me is true freedom, true liberation, where I can transcend the constraints of my subconscious, which are in words, to come back so we can finish the point. They're not truths. They're forms of programming, they're constructs that I've been stuck within as a prisoner, and I may have developed survival strategies on top of it, behavioral adaptations, like you were becoming a nice guy, you'd go to the bar, you didn't want to, you have to call the wife. All of these things were compensations for a deeper belief of inadequacy about yourself and insecurity, that you're not wanted, you've done something wrong. So your whole brain is wired to make sure I don't do anything wrong because the cost of that is too immense. I feel not wanted. What your brain didn't realize is the I'm not wanted was self-generated. That's the madness of the game. It's the cliche of look in the mirror, that's your only enemy. Right? So your not being wanted was an experience that you made up in language, and you would have had evidence, from age 2, 3, 5, 12, as we've discussed, to confirm it. But it's just you're using external evidence to confirm an internal narrative. So the ego's number one priority is to be right about itself. And that's the madness of the work that I've seen for 2 decades now, is people will defend and fight for their limitations. I will prove to you that nobody loves me. They're just wanting to be right about their own inadequacy.
It's always me that this happens to. Why me again?
Perfect.
Yeah?
So let's just finish for you, because I really want you to get this. So you've realized the I'm not wanted exists only in you. It exists in your mind in words. So therefore, I'm going to ask you a question. You can only answer yes or no. Is it true, therefore, that you are not wanted? Yes or no?
No.
No. Now, feel into that. When you feel not wanted, we've already got a glimpse of what your life looks like. But in the absence, and this may seem like a weird way of doing it, if the I'm not wanted is gone, you just don't have that relationship to yourself and life, how do you feel?
Free.
Total freedom. And how do you feel with the way that you interact with life and other people?
You feel...
Say I, because it's more powerful.
I feel calm.
Yeah.
I feel loving. I feel compassionate. I feel non-judgmental.
Yeah.
I feel at ease.
Yeah, the absence of dis-ease, right? Amazing. So that's one. Now, the bigger one, because this is a big one for humans, is when you were 12 and your friends were just using this one incident, obviously there were many prior to it, but they disappeared or whatever happened at this schoolyard in Manchester, and you thought maybe you'd done something wrong, or as a little boy, very polite, I could guess maybe your environment as a kid, you know, we're all disciplined and don't mess it up, don't do bad. So we think there's stuff we do wrong. At that moment, did you literally, and you can only say yes or no, do anything wrong?
No.
No. And I don't care if you threw stones at them. You were just throwing stones. It wasn't wrong. I'm not saying it's an ideal way to make friends, but you weren't doing something wrong. Okay, so do you get that? You didn't do anything wrong. When you came to America, let's bring it a little bit more current, last time, and you felt, oh gosh, I'm leaving my wife and my kids at home. Was that, and you can only say yes or no, was that wrong?
No.
No, it's what you thought was wrong, but it wasn't actually wrong. I want you to consider, and this is a big thing for you to digest, in your life, you have never, ever done anything wrong. Ever. Now, this will probably create a little bit of stir amongst people because it's a bigger subject in terms of crimes and things that people do that really do have subsequent, painful effects on people. But I just want you to consider you've never done anything wrong from, the time you stole some sweets at the local newsagents or you cheated on a test or whatever you did was what you did as a kid. It's not wrong. I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm not saying it was legal. I'm not saying it was optimal. But I want you to consider it's not wrong. It's just what you did. And in the physical universe that we live, it has consequences. Smoking is not wrong. Is it great for you? No. If you're like an ox, you'll get away with it. If you're very frail, it's probably going to have bigger impact on your physiology. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%.
So I'm going to ask again. Have you ever in your life, yes or no, done anything wrong?
No.
Now, do you really get that?
I do get it.
Right. Now, just feel into that.
I think, Peter, the reason I think I get it, the reason I know I get it is because I just feel different these days.
Yeah.
I feel, how can I put it? I feel at ease.
The way that people currently live is they look for solutions and strategies for the most part to problems, which is very logical, right? If I have a weight problem or if I have a relationship problem or I have a finance problem, I want to find solutions to my problems. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a very archaic method of trying to find relief because what you're actually doing is reinforcing the belief that you have a problem. So what I'm appealing to is what if there was a different way to access freedom that was actually more of a process of dissolution than solution, which is one of my sort of catchphrases. I say I don't solve people's problems, I dissolve them. So I would assert that's why what I had to share really resonated with people because we're all human, we're all doing the best we can. And yet there is this profound, deep knowing that things could be a lot better. And there is a different way to look at life. And I like to give people new eyes to look at whatever they can currently think their problems to be, such that they find immense freedom from them. So, and who doesn't want that? So
yeah, who doesn't want that? And I think that term freedom, which is what you offer people, is something we should definitely redefine a little bit at the start of this conversation.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
A lot of people will be listening thinking, I mean, you're talking about freedom, but I am free.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm free in my life. So how can you offer me freedom?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and a lot of people do feel that, and I don't want to take that away from them. The sort of freedom I'm talking about is freedom from suffering, freedom from the limitations, constraints of our subconscious, which, again, I'm going to assert everybody has. It's just part of this dimension of planet Earth and being here as a human being. We're going to have our own perceived limitations and constraints. So the freedom I speak of is more like a spiritual freedom. It is awakening to the true essence of who we are beyond the facade of our sort of human persona. So every problem anybody has, as far as I'm concerned, belongs to the idea of themselves. So over time, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, today, through the conditions of our childhood and these caregivers from our mums and dads who aren't bad people, they're doing the best they can, but we're going to be triggered into we're not enough and we did something wrong or we're bad and we're failures, all of these things that we have to experience on our journey. Then what happens is what was for a child pure possibility of being alive sort of became increasingly less possibility. And that then becomes resignation and cynicism and struggle and depression. And then that leads to the myriad of different methods we use to seek, relief from depression or suffering. And so freedom to me is freedom from that whole bucket of pain and misery.
Peter, you see as clients, some of the most successful people out there.
Yeah.
We talked about your story last time. We talked about how you used to train Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
How you help people with their mind. Top sports stars, basketball players, golfers, business executives.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. You have a lot of high performers coming to see you.
Yeah.
And you help them unlock things so, they can be freer. They can actually live the life that they're meant to live.
Yeah.
I'm really interested for people at home who don't fall into that category.
Yeah.
Are there things that you do with these high performers that they can also do in their own life that's going to help them?
100%. And look, I may well work with high-end performers in different things, from sports to business to entertainment, but performance is a word that I would ascribe to any human being, a stay-at-home parent, mom or dad, a kid going into his first year at secondary school, or everybody's performing at some level. So performance is sort of just a big catch-all for the fact that as a human being, you're doing something. And what I like to help people is to do it at a greater sense of efficiency and joy and productivity. So whether you're, pitching for the New York Yankees with a lot of pressure because of, not only the thousands of people watching in a stadium, but the millions of fans and the millions of dollars at stake, or you're somebody who's moving to a new town and you don't know many people and you're trying to find your way, that still for me falls under the umbrella of performance. So how do I help people? Well, first of all, recognize, where do you get triggered? Right, that's the gift. I use an expression, it's one of my quotes. I say, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So if ever you get upset by something or someone, that's the thing to look for. That's almost like, well, there's the treasure that is the pathway to discover some more freedom. Because if you're unable to sit with or be with a circumstance, then what I assert is life is showing you where there's an opportunity for you to become a more powerful human being. So if your mother-in-law or your uncle or your brother or your dad or whoever it is or your boss upsets you, then what I would invite people to look at is, what is the perceived threat, right? Because if we look at it really in terms of physics, somebody's doing something or somebody's saying something. But our brain is perceiving either of those activities as a threat if we get upset. If we're not getting upset, then we're saying that's fine. They can do and have their opinion and they can take whatever choices in terms of actions they want. But wherever we get triggered to some sort of emotion, negative emotion, that's what I would ask both my clients and your listeners to go, okay, I got upset by this event. So what is it that is being triggered in me, because all the fear is in me, that is causing that reaction? And that's the tool, right? It's like, wow, if I'm upset by a circumstance, then I have an opportunity to find more freedom.
And I think that word opportunity is very apt there, isn't it? Because many of us, and I absolutely did this in the past as well, would look at a situation where we perceive someone to, someone has upset me, for example.
Yeah.
And we often look to them saying, their behavior has upset me. If they change their behavior, I wouldn't be upset.
Right.
And that, I think, is what most people think. Now, when you go through this process, and I've not had the pleasure of working with you, but I've gone through my own process. It's funny for me, one of the biggest shifts in my life over the past at least 12 months, is this idea, if anything triggers me in life, that's an opportunity to self-examine. Instead of shunning it away and pretending it's not happening, it's about leaning into it. I go, hey, what's this teaching me? Because you're right, if you were completely at ease with the situation, it wouldn't trigger you. Right. And the example I use for people, and it's something I use for myself, like social media can be a toxic place. There's many benefits of it, but certainly some people get triggered a lot. Some people find other people offensive. Or in the past, I have some sort of public profile. You know, people will take shots at you for particular things. And in the past, it might have upset me. Whereas now, I use it as a mirror.
Yeah.
To go, hey, why are you being triggered by that comment? Okay. Because I can't control what someone else is doing.
Right.
Right. So it's like, well, what is going on inside me?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be easier to figure out than at other times, right? So how do you know, if people want to use that, because I think that phrase you say is brilliant.
Thank you.
If people want to use that and go, okay, look, so if I'm being triggered at some point in my life by my brother, by my wife, by my colleague, by my boss, whoever, you know, you can fill in the gap for whoever you want, basically. Yeah. Instead of looking to them, it's about looking to yourself. But how does someone do that?
By, first of all, listening to something like this, whether it's us or reading a book or another workshop or another podcast, where they're at least starting to become aware of the illusion, because even in your own language, you said, well, you know, that person upset me.
Yeah.
Now that totally, from a human perspective, and we're all human doing the best we can. So first of all, there's compassion. But secondly, that is how it seems, right? Like, no, well, why are you upset? Well, so-and-so did something or so-and-so said something. That's just everyday common conversation. But it's an illusion, because nobody upset you. Somebody did something or said something, and then that triggered the upset that was already in you, right? Or if you said earlier about social media, somebody found somebody's page or post offensive.
Yeah.
Well, that again is revealing not so much what's going on over there in the post or the social media, but rather what is it about my beliefs that are in conflict with somebody else's self-expression.
Now, Peter, some people are going to be pushing away at this point. They're going to be hearing this and going, what on earth are they talking about? I mean, look, that guy has been mean, so therefore I am upset.
Yes.
Right? So when you can see through that, and when you move beyond that, and you understand, and I say that with compassion, right? I'm not saying that as like, I'm not sitting on a high horse and saying, you know, it's just, there is freedom on the other side. When you figure that stuff out, when you realize that it's a mirror back to you.
Yeah.
For me, I think that's where growth happens. I think that's where freedom lies. That's where peace lies.
Yes.
But what about someone? I mean, you need awareness first, right? I mean, what if someone just doesn't get it? What would you say to them?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like through, you know, you sharing work and doing these podcasts with people, and there's obviously nowadays millions of podcasts out there where people are talking on similar subjects, that we start with awareness and be gentle with ourselves. Because especially in my work, what I'm doing is I'm taking these deep, deep subconscious patterns, which are primal, meaning that they are deep in our DNA, they're survival mechanisms. Then we're bringing what was subconscious to conscious. So it's like, oh, wow, I can see that I have a pattern. I have a tendency. I have a conditioned response to a particular external stimulus. So I take myself, for example, because then I'm happy to be vulnerable about my own arc of freedom. So for me, what was a trigger was anything that was of value that was potentially going to leave me, right? Now, that's a general term, but it could be a girlfriend that I was in love with or that I was very close to. The fear was, okay, now there's something external that I'm putting all of this value on. What if it leaves? Now, that could also be someone's job. It could be somebody's financial wealth. It could be their status in a company. It could be their home. Like anything that we put any sort of sense of worth upon, it's a human tendency to be worried about losing that. Right now, the stock markets are crashing everywhere because of the fear of the virus. And so many people are going to be in a state of fear and reaction because they're losing something. So that would be the opportunity. Okay, what is the threat?
Or their perception is that they're losing something.
Yes. And some people may literally be losing something, right? But loss is that's a deeper distinction, right? Form comes and goes is the way I talk about it. I could say I've lost a lot of money on the stock market. I have relative to my portfolio, but it was always in my portfolio. So did I really have it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, so again, that's an example where many years ago, I would have been in a mild state of panic or concern, which would have been normal. It's human. It's okay. But now it is like, okay, it could be mildly frustrating. It's not what I want, but it's a different relationship to the same external stimulus. So it's to answer your question, we got to bring awareness to what is the subconscious pattern that I have based on my primary caregivers of mum and dad or high school or, you know, kindergarten or wherever we learned these survival mechanisms, so that now I can find responsibility, because that's really what we're talking about here is either I'm a victim of life, where, like you said, somebody upset me. Well, now you're a victim of your circumstance. Or I'm 100% responsible for my relationship to life, because as Shakespeare said, nothing is either good nor bad, only thinking makes it so. Now, if you really understand that, it's beautiful, right? So nothing actually is quote unquote good or bad. It is entirely our own interpretation that is superimposed, our own narrative that we are positioning on top of an event or a person. And so that becomes the world of I. And at the most deepest level, the ego or the identity or the persona, its main objective is to be right about itself. And that's, for me, I joke and I laugh with compassion again, because people are doing the best they can. But when you really get it, people are arguing for their limitations. They're saying, no, watch me screw this up, or, oh, it was too good to be true. Like, when these sort of generalized comments are thrown out there, what you're actually saying is, I'm reinforcing my own belief that things don't work out for me. Yeah. So it's mad, right? That we argue for inadequacy, we argue for insecurity, we argue for scarcity, and that to me is it's very human, but it's also such a disservice to the immense possibility that it is to be human once you break out of these very primal limitations.
It can sometimes be easier to see these patterns in other people.
Without a doubt, it's blatantly obvious when it's somebody else, but when it's you, it's like, yeah.
And I mean, you shared some of your own sort of journey there, and like for people who heard the first podcast, you shared how you lost your mum when you were 7 years old.
Correct. Yeah.
You lost your father in the Zeebrugge ferry disaster
when I was 17. Yeah.
When you were 17. That is a rough start in life.
Yeah.
Well, certainly most people would say that is a super rough start.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you're saying that there is a feeling of people who I love, whether it's parents or you mentioned a girlfriend leaving, is that your subconscious programming that is affecting your conscious thoughts? Like, is that something you've had to work on?
100%.
And is it stuff that you've had to, or you managed to work on yourself, or because it's hard to see ourselves, has Mr. Peter Crone, the mind architect, needed to get help in order to do that?
Both. And I think the greatest form of help is life.
Yeah.
Right? Which goes back to my comment about, like, life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So where was I not free? Around the fear of loss. But where was the fear of loss? Within me. Right? So if we look back at when this one girlfriend was, sort of a catalyst for my own quote unquote awakening, where I started all of my work, this is now like 20 something years ago, where I first had what we would as humans call the experience of love, and there's puppy love, and we have all these different connotations of love. But for me, there was a significant connection with somebody. And so at the time, it seems devastating, doesn't it? It's like, oh no, like my whole world is falling apart. So that was the catalyst. That was what revealed. So that was the help that I got, was this particular girl leaving. But it wasn't that the love was over there. It was that life set me up for success, right? Because if she hadn't left, I wouldn't have to look at what is the deep-seated fear within me. And that's what I assert we're all here. This dimension of planet Earth, it is an incredible paradigm for us all to have to face the constraints that we arrived with, right? And this starts to sound a bit esoteric, but for me, I would assert we arrive with all of our bucket of fears and concerns, and then life, for your own personal movie of life, will have all the cast of characters and circumstances that you need to have to face your fears and limitations. Now, if you play that game, actually, when you get triggered and upset, it's going back to what we said earlier, it's a wonderful opportunity. But most people don't look at it that way. Yeah. They look at fear and adversity as a pain in the rear, and I'm going to do everything to avoid it, which is why people don't actually go anywhere, right? So I use a story. I think stories are so powerful, and I've got so many courtesy of these beautiful clients that I've had. But there's this one gentleman, he was from a very traditional Catholic family. He had a significant other. They weren't married, so that was the first taboo, within the Catholic family and tradition. Then it got even worse. They'd had a child out of wedlock. They're not married. And this was prior to Thanksgiving many years ago. And his dilemma was that he knew the relationship was coming to an end with this woman. It was very problematic. She was very mercurial and whatever. There's a lot of drama. So he came to me one day and he's like, look, I'm going to go to Thanksgiving and I don't know what to do. If I go with her and the child, everyone will assume that everything, business is as usual. But if I don't go with her, then everyone's going to question what's going on. So what do I do? Now, that's a very human binary way of looking at any problem. 0 or 1, 0 or 1, 0 or 1. And I said, it doesn't really matter what you do, because until you address what is the real root cause here, which is your fear in the fact that you don't feel fully loved and accepted by your family. So you don't actually have an honest, transparent, open relationship with your family. So whether you take her or you don't take her, you still have to, and you will be presented with the challenge of actually being so vulnerable with your family about your concerns, about how they think about you. So that was the bit, and he said, wow, like he got that he actually, as much as he loved his family, and they truly loved him, but they didn't have a true intimate relationship because they weren't being fully honest with each other. And this is why, you and I have talked about relationships, and why relationships don't work is because most people aren't fully authentic or open. And so that's one example of where his opportunity was to look at not was the solution to his fear, which would have kept him in the fear, but rather what is the fear and how can I break beyond that?
It's a bit like symptom suppression or getting to the root cause. Whether he went or not, fine, it may have stopped a mini drama, potentially.
Yes.
But the mini dramas would keep coming. Like, they're not going anywhere because actually the root cause of that it's not being addressed.
Yes. And that's why, again, as I said, it doesn't really matter what we do in terms of strategy or solution or the way that we try to mitigate or avoid perceived future problems. Unless you deal with the deep feeling of limitation, inadequacy, insecurity, scarcity, then it's still with you, right? Like I always say, if you notice wherever you have problems in life, you're there. Right? Or as I more tongue-in-cheek say, no you, no problem, right? There's no problems in life. There just aren't. And that's a very bold statement and a hard one for people to swallow. And I'm not for 1 minute saying that life is ideal or that I condone certain behaviors. But there's not a problem. There's just what's happening, and then there's the circumstance of it. And sometimes the circumstances are very unpleasant and very painful. But the problems are all in our perception or how we relate to life. So really, if we were to talk about relationships, to me, life is relationship. Relationship is often understood as it's like a person and a person, right? Male, female, 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 whatever it is, whether it's romantic or family or professional. But to me, relationship is our experience to life. We relate to life. However we relate to anything is what garners our own personal experience of life. And if people could just get that, then they have an entirely different way of looking at life. How am I relating to life versus what is happening out there somewhere separate to me that apparently is causing my experience of life? That's the victim model. That's the survival model. I have to do something in order to be loved and accepted. And now people are exhausted, their adrenals are shot. They're finding all sorts of means of escape, whether it be food, sex, drugs, whatever it is, alcohol, versus going, oh, hang on a minute. What if there is absolutely nothing out there that is causing my suffering other than my own superimposed perspective of circumstance? Now, where that gets tricky is that superimposition is for the most part subconscious.
Yeah.
So that's why we've got to bring awareness to why am I feeling nervous about a public appearance or like doing a presentation at work. They think it's, because everybody's going to laugh at me or whatever it is. No, that's something within you. Maybe when you were 5 or 7, you did a show and tell at school and people laughed. And that little bit of trauma is now still in you as a 45-year-old executive. And it's still the same way that you're relating to speaking to a group. Or the fact that your parents gave your older sibling a little bit more attention and bigger toys made you feel that, I'm not as loved as my older brother or sister. And so now you tend to attract a spouse or a partner, a boyfriend or a girlfriend who doesn't seem to give you the kind of attention that you'd like. Well, because you're still living in that's the way that you relate to yourself. I'm not the one that gets all the attention. That goes to fill in the blank, right? So that's the patterns that we want to keep revealing. And then we want to inquire into them. We want to ask, is it true? Is it true that I'm not lovable? Or is it true that I'm not enough somehow? Is it true that I'm a failure? And if we put question marks at the end of our own concerns, it's amazing how it will just open up a little bit of space for people, because my assertion is it's never a truth, it's just an opinion.
I mean, I've heard you say before, I think, that conscious thinking is a result of subconscious programming.
Correct, yeah. And feeling too. That's where it gets really tricky.
And feeling.
So the way that we think and feel, because feelings are that much more they've got density because now they become associated with our body. But yeah, the subconscious pattern, or the it's literally like a construct. It's imagine like a particular framework, and then the thoughts, feelings, and actions live within that. So like this room is, I don't know, 200 square feet, right? That's the size of the room. That could represent the subconscious. Now, in this room, for that reason, we're going to have certain conversations that are available to us. This is great to do a podcast. We could maybe have like a little dinner party in here. But we're not having thoughts about, oh, let's throw some fantastic, rock band event here, or the Olympics.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in the space because the space doesn't call for it. So if in my mind, the space I'm living in is I'm not enough, then the dreams and aspirations that I really have in my heart and soul, they don't become conscious thoughts because they're not available in a confined space. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that's why I love what I do, because I crack open these perceived limitations. And then people literally have an entirely new experience of who they are and what the world is and what becomes available. It is truly the world of pure possibility.
Yeah. No, I love it, and I like you, I want everyone to experience it.
Damn right, let's go.
But yeah, because it is like living your best life, being able to do the things that you've dreamt of, but you often put up obstacles to actually, to actually living out those dreams. And I think that story about, let's say someone at 45 is nervous to public speak, scared of what people are going to think. And then you relate that back to a show and tell when they were 5 or 7, when they got laughed at.
Yeah.
And it is, I think there's two parts of that for me. There's some imprinting that I guess often happens in childhood that serves a purpose in childhood, but no longer serves us as adults.
Yeah.
But also this idea that, it's ultimately conscious or unconscious. It's a story, isn't it? It's a story that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And we repeat it enough times, or we feel it enough, that becomes our reality. But ultimately, we have created that story.
Yeah.
So is the tool for people sometimes, because I think if you don't talk about this stuff, if you stay inside your own head all the time, you can create these stories, and these stories become bigger and bigger inside your mind. That's why I think even simple things like journaling can be so beneficial for people, because you write stuff down and suddenly you see it written on paper. You go, you know what, God, I'm being a bit harsh on myself here. Or I don't know, a therapist or a counselor, when there's a third person there, suddenly that kind of emotional narrative, that story you tell yourself, it can be, you can sort of convince yourself that that's the truth, but in front of someone else, suddenly you're like, actually, God, I'm being a bit harsh on myself. I don't know. Is part of the problem that we don't talk about this stuff with third parties who have no emotional attachment to us. Like we're going to come onto relationships for sure.
Yeah.
But often we can create these narratives within our relationships. Let's say with a husband, with a wife, with a boyfriend, with a girlfriend. Things can fester out of control very quickly because two people have got their own narratives that they're strongly holding on to. And I think this is why couples therapy or thing can be so beneficial sometimes, just to have a third person there who's not related. You can suddenly go, actually, you know what? I'm talking a load of nonsense, aren't I, really? And it's only apparent when there's somebody else in the room.
Totally. No, I think, and I mean, as the majority of your audience is probably, from England, I think as domicile Brit, we were brought up in a sort of relatively reserved way, right? Like having come here to the States, there's a lot more self-expression. There's less conservatism in terms of the way that people just dress and talk and believe.
Is that a good thing? I'll tell you why I asked that. I would have thought, as a kid growing up in the UK, we had a certain perception of Americans. You know, the sort of, this is awesome. This is like very, very emotive.
We're number one.
Right. And I think as Brits, we always thought, a lot of Brits find that brash and distasteful. Right. But I have changed my view on that over the last, maybe the last 5 years, in the sense that I kind of feel, you know what, at least they're expressing the way they're feeling. They're not holding back. They're not keeping it in there. They're expressing it. They're not afraid. This is my perception. To, sell themselves, to talk about their qualities and things that we as Brits found, distasteful and not the way you do things. Actually, well, maybe we're the ones who have actually got the issue where we won't express our emotions, where we'll keep them locked inside and we won't say things that we're proud of. Do you know what I mean? You have that unique perspective. Sure. You grew up in the UK, you now live out here in California.
Yeah.
You know, what's your take on that? Is there something cultural in that? And is the American way potentially more helpful?
I think it's, you know, cultures are sort of the en masse expression of the individual, right? The collective expresses, like you look at Australia, the same, right? Tall poppy syndrome. So that gets indoctrinated into kids as we grow up. Like, well, don't show off too much because then people want to cut you down. Germany, Schadenfreude, right, as the expression of like getting joy out of someone else's failure. It's so regardless of which country or territory you go to, I think it's sort of, it's human conditioning. Why? Because we're programmed to, as I said, come from scarcity, inadequacy, and insecurity. So there's a certain joy or comfort in the limitations that we see in others. Why? Because it's a reflection of our own. And so I think that's the biggest obstacle that we have to overcome. And I do think to a certain degree, the States, you know, there is a degree of, it is being brash. I say it's like the cocky teenager, you know, whereas you look at Europe, it's like the wise grandfather, you know, and that's just sort of speaking to how long these civilizations have been there, right? Like Europe is quote unquote much older. So if we were to look at it collectively, it's like a wise grandpa, you know, whereas America is a young country and it's like full of testosterone. It's like, we're number one, right? So I think there's a degree of like, as massive generalizations, I think that's just because of the relative ages of different countries. But I think over here in the States, one thing that I will, you know, tip my cap to is that people are much more, they're less reticent to talk about their feelings. They're much more conditioned to have a therapist is very normal, you know, and I think that can also become problematic because, you know, kids who are 5 and 6 and 7 years old are now in therapy. And I'm like, well, maybe that would be better served to be a conversation with the parents, but the parents are too busy living the American dream. So I mean, we can cut this down any way you want. Whereas what I think is the most important thing to take out of this is to not be embarrassed by what you feel and to find a safe place, whether it's professional, whether it's, you know, a loving family member, whether it's a really great friend. I think one of the attributes that I do love about myself, and I'd assert it's one of my biggest pillars in my work, is the ability to listen. And I think most humans don't know how to listen. They just react. So one example, I was just doing a workshop, it was a few months ago now, in Hawaii. And I was speaking to many of these things, and there was 90+% women who are on this retreat, beautiful retreat. And this one woman posed a question. She said, well, how do I help my son? Because he's always belittling himself relative to his older brother. And she gave the example of like, oh, well, I'll never be as good as Johnny, is what he said. And because she's a loving mother, her reaction was, oh, honey, no, you're this and you're that. And she started giving him all these accolades, which to the lay mind is like, well, that's wonderful. She cares about her son. And it's a subtle distinction, but it was very important. And it changed her whole relationship with her son. I said, you're not listening to your son. You're superimposing your world on top of his, and he doesn't feel heard. Now, I don't want him to stay and hang out in the feeling of inadequacy relative to his brother. That's not what I'm condoning. But I'm saying he's not being heard, which is why he also feels somehow less than, right? Do you understand? So he said, I don't feel as, or I'll never be as good as Johnny. Now, that's what he's saying. Now, somebody who can listen would feel into, gosh, what must that feel like for that kid? And then we can start to have compassion and hold a space for his reality, because his reality at that moment is feeling inadequate, needing to be seen, needing to be held, not to be pumped up like, no, you're this and you're that, right? Which we've all done to friends, like, oh, no, you're amazing. But sometimes what people want is just to be heard. I feel lousy. I don't feel very good about myself. I don't know what I'm doing with myself. Like, these are legitimate, everyday human experiences. And I think one of the greatest gifts we can give each other is just to let somebody feel those things. We don't necessarily want them to hang out there, but to literally let them have their reality. Because oftentimes, if we to think about it physically, it's almost like an emotional toxin that we're trying to release. And as soon as we say, no, you're amazing, we're actually suppressing the expression of something that is currently discomforting in us. So for that woman, she literally had a tear in her eye and she was like, wow, I do that all the time. Now, it was by no means a judgment of her because she's coming from a loving place. She adores her son.
Yeah.
But she said, it's so true because he often says, you don't listen to me. And she never made that connection. So again, it's subtle. We don't want him to feel inadequate, but we want to honor his reality because then he will literally feel seen and heard, which gives him a sense of value because we're saying, we love you enough to actually honor your reality. Then we can get into, well, why do you feel that way? What happened? Was it because of Johnny's performance at something or because he got better grade? I don't know. But now we get into their world, which is the gift of real relationship, is really understand someone else's reality versus forcing your own perception of them on top of theirs.
Peter, that is, I think, such a powerful story because there will be many parents listening to this who I think will just take a beat there and go, wait a minute, let me just rewind. That's that because I do that to my own children. And what's interesting for people, I think, is that it's from a place of love.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, people are trying to protect their child.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people will be thinking, I do that to my child. And I think it is subtle, but it's very key. It's very, very key. And it's something I think Vid and I, my wife, we have changed a lot with our kids over the past years as we've understood this more and more. It's like, hold on a minute. Don't just reflex-wise just say, no, that's not the case. So hold on. You're saying, it's a two-step process. Step number one is, let them have that and make sure they feel heard. That's fundamentally what every human wants, isn't it? To feel heard. I think precision in language is probably one of the most important things I've taken from you, Peter, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I found most inspiring.
Cool, thank you.
And I found it quite mesmerizing, actually, hearing the way you describe certain things. And I think, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to describe things with that level of precision?
Yeah. It is amazing in as much as it gives a human being the sense of power, responsibility, and freedom, which to me is what everyone's looking for. They might say they want more money. They might say they want a better relationship or a better job. They might say they want a better body. But to me, they are all milestones or stepping stones towards the fundamental experiences. I just want to feel free. Or in lay terms, I just want to feel good. And most people don't. They feel sick. They feel dis-ease, the absence of ease. And that's why I'm so passionate about this work, because I have seen it for 2 decades now, where lives are literally transformed. They are transfigured. They're transmuted because people are transcending these deep beliefs of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity, which are not truths. They're just inherited beliefs that at the deepest level are informing everybody's behaviors. And to get beyond that is freedom.
So a lot of inner work is done in a way where these things are processed unconsciously or without you having to literally talk through various events. There's talking therapy, there's many different modalities.
Yeah.
So I guess what intrigues me about your work is, how do you get somebody to reprogram their subconscious mind?
It's a great question. And beyond reprogramming, it's actually easier because, see, reprogramming still implies that I've got to do something.
Okay, remove the new programming, like restore to factory settings? Right. Is that a better way?
You just got to hit the volume bottom and the power button
at the same time.
It will reboot.
But is that what it is? Is it resetting to factory settings?
To a certain degree, but it's, this could be another 2 hours. But to me, the first step into this journey of awakening, liberation, freedom, whatever you want to call it, is awareness. So with you, just even here in this conversation, I brought, maybe a degree of awareness to, for example, the belief that I'm not wanted. It wasn't how you phrased your story. You said my friends left me and blah, 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 and then I molded myself to another group. But you didn't go, and I was left feeling not wanted. Now, you didn't articulate that. That was the deep, deep feeling. So now that you have awareness of it, We could both talk about, what does it feel to be not wanted? Oh, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I feel lonely, what's the point? Like, these are things that people really feel, but they only feel that because at the deeper level, they're in the world of, I'm not wanted. That's the prison. So the awareness of the prison, you don't need to reprogram it. You don't even need to get rid of it. You just go, oh, wow, I'm human. I spent the first almost 3 decades of my life thinking I just wasn't good enough. My nickname at college was Perfect Pete. Right? Now, that was a compensation. That was a moniker given to me because I was always trying to not be not good enough. Can you see?
You have such a lovely way of describing perfectionism. I don't know if you can remember it. You've probably got so many amazing phrases.
Well, it's an adaptation to feeling that we're inadequate, right? That we're not enough. But I'm not enough is a lie.
Yeah.
So therefore,
that was it. Yeah. It's an adaptation to us feeling we're not adequate.
Yeah, it's a behavioral response.
It is so powerful that even that just one phrase alone, if people like I have done, if you just sit with that and let it sort of seep into you and just see what comes up.
Yes.
There is such a deep, deep truth to that phrase.
That's why I love what I get to do for people, because I'm like you. We're both very sensitive men, and I love that quality. Your sensitivity at one time was also your vulnerability, where you didn't want to be exposed, and so you protected yourself. But actually, we're all sentient beings. We are very sensitive. We've numbed ourselves by callousing over with these survival mechanisms. So I just really care about people. I want people to break free. It's not my job to go on, knock door to door because there's defense, right? Like I worked with a lot of sports teams, and one of the athletic trainers would ask me, like, how can I help someone? I said, they have to come to you. You can make a suggestion. Even in language, I will say, can I make a suggestion? Now listen to that language. I'm asking them, can I come in? It's like, you don't just bust through someone's front door, you ring the bell. And if they open it, you can go in for a cup of tea and a crumpet or whatever, you can have a conversation. But you don't bust in and say, hey, your furniture's in the wrong place. Yeah. They're going to either pull out a gun if you're in Texas, or in England, they'll call the police. Point is, there's a way to be able to access people. I just happen to really care because people, to your point, are suffering. People are sick mentally, physically, emotionally. And so awareness of these codes, and hopefully a lot of people get stuff from this conversation today, that's certainly my intention, is just the start. If I can see, wow, the reason my relationship doesn't work, the reason I have a health issue, the reason I don't seem to get acknowledged in the workplace or make the money I feel I deserve, the reason I don't have the courage to start my business is because I feel fundamentally somehow inadequate. And then to ask yourself, is it true that I'm inadequate? No, it's what I feel, it's what I believe. It's not a truth. And in the absence of that, what becomes available is freedom and absolutely pure possibility. And that's what I want to appeal to people. I'm not interested in fixing people's problems. Why? Because I know they don't have any. And that's a fundamentally very different way to approach humans.
Yeah. I think this conversation is going to resonate so deeply with many. I think some people are likely to push back.
I'll get hammered.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
No, but they're going to if we're going to be precise. I guess this is where I know I've got more growth to do, because as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, I don't want to offend people.
No, of course. Nor do I.
Nor do you. I get that. You don't. And one thing I love about you is that you are genuinely non-judgmental. You are just speaking the truth.
Yeah.
Certainly the truth, the way you see it. And I actually see it that way as well.
Yeah.
But my point is that always saying what people want you to say, which I have done at many points in my life, I'm not sure who that serves. It certainly doesn't serve the other person. It doesn't serve yourself.
No.
It sort of bleeds into all aspects of your life. So I do find, as I'm describing this, I know I've got more work to do. But I think the people who don't like this, as is very likely to happen, it is probably because I would imagine they're not ready to hear it yet, or it's too close to the bone.
It's threatening. That's all it is. Whenever anyone reacts, first of all, to your point, I always say I'd much rather hear an honest criticism than a dishonest compliment. Because I can be with that. I'm not here to try and make everybody happy. It's not my job. I'm here to share. I love to inspire. Beyond truth, I like to talk about physics. If you, in your mind, at the deepest level, think that you're not loved, not wanted, not worth anything, I know that you're going to do whatever you have to do to try and survive. That's just physics. I'm not saying this is the way it is, like it's Peter Crone's methodology. It's just life, you know? And I know human beings are scared and they live in fear and they're trying to survive. And if I can help people break out of that to find some sense of liberation, then that's what I'm committed to, right? So I get that people may have pushback, but whenever we have any reaction, all that's ever happening is our beliefs are being challenged. We see a potential threat. Now,
neuroscience has shown that your fight or flight response will get activated by that.
Yes.
Not that we need neuroscience to tell us that, but if you have a tightly held belief, for example, this is the dietary way to eat.
Yes.
This diet is the right way to eat.
Yeah.
If that is your identity, and then somebody presents a differing view to you,
yes,
that is threatening. And that suddenly explains, to me at least, a lot of the toxicity that appears to be out there on social media.
There's one powerful line that I'm going to give of all movies. It's the third Matrix, I think. And The Matrix, to me, one of the first movies, is one of the most powerful. I don't think it's a film so much as a documentary, but in terms of this work, right? But in the third, to this point, in the third one, I believe it is, Zion, for anyone who's following Matrix, it's the HQ of all the free souls, so to speak, is under attack from the machines, right? So sort of the external world is attacking these free spirits. And the commander-in-chief at Zion, he calls all of the ships to come back so they can defend their territory. Morpheus, who's the character who finds Keanu Reeves' character, Neo, again, for people who are not watching this, I'm sorry, but hopefully you'll get something from it anyway. He leaves his ship out so he can be in contact with the Matrix, the outside world. The head of defense says, "Damn it, Morpheus, I told you to bring all of the ships back." And he said, "I left my ship out there so we can contact the Oracle." The Oracle is the fortune teller who's going to predict the state of the world, and Neo, if he's the one. So he said, and then the head of defense, and this is a powerful line, he says, "Not everybody believes what you believe," meaning Morpheus believes that Neo's going to save the world. And Morpheus says, "My beliefs do not require them to." Now, not everybody believes what you believe, and he says, "My beliefs do not require them to." Meaning, if somebody gets threatened by whatever I'm saying, it shows me that their beliefs are a little bit shaky, which is okay too. Somebody can tell me whatever they think. It's not going to faze me because I'm comfortable with what I believe, unless what they say is inspiring enough for me to go, "Oh, wow, that actually could shift my life. Yeah. Thank you." But it's certainly not going to upset me. So that right there is a tell. It's a giveaway that if someone gets upset, what they believe is actually very fragile. And they're attached to that as a form of their identity versus something that they're truly embedded in as a way of living. And that's subtle. Like if your beliefs are not shaken by other beliefs, that's a powerful state to be in.
Yeah, it is the most powerful state to be in, I would argue.
Yeah, because then that's also comes back full circle to our point about listening. See, again, I'm not sitting here going, "Wow, I'm all this," and it's not about that. It's like I let people have their reality. So I'm listening. Even if somebody right now thinks I'm just full of it. This guy, he's living in California. He's not British. He's blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm sorry you feel that. If you got to know me, I'm very loving, I'm caring, I love to help people, but maybe that's not their interpretation. It might not be what I want to hear, but I can listen and let them have their reality. It's not going to upset me because fundamentally, I believe everybody loves everybody. It's just they've got beliefs in the way. And that's what I'm wanting people to. It may sound a bit utopian and Nirvana-like, but to me, if we can wake up, what a world to live in where people are at least respectful. You don't have to be loving, but at least kind and compassionate versus, all the violence that we live in on this planet.
This is not pie in the sky for people. This, I feel, is achievable for everyone. This is the goal to aspire to.
Yes.
This is the ultimate in meaning and fulfillment in living if the pursuit of happiness is what you're after, this is what will get you there. Although again, I've heard another brilliant phrase from you about happiness.
Yeah.
And I love it. I wonder if you could share it.
Of course. It's one of my favorite quotes in the book that's coming out. As I say, true happiness is the absence of the search for happiness.
I just want everyone listening to just sit with that for a couple of seconds.
True happiness is the absence of the search for happiness. If you really get that, that is true peace. Because what you're saying is, I'm totally okay where I am. I don't need things to be different. And I'm not relying on some idealized one-day future where I think that I'm going to be happy, which would be the pursuit of happiness, which ironically is in the Declaration of Independence in America. The pursuit of happiness. I'm like, well, how about you just be happy now? Now, that's not to say we rest on our laurels. I'm creating a lot. I'm very aspirational. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm building lots of things because it's fun to create. But I am simultaneously completely at peace and content with the way that my life is today.
Yeah, I love that. That is something I will sit with this evening for sure.
That to me is the greatest precursor to healing, because stress, as you know, as a doctor, is synonymous with sickness, right? The inflammatory response as maybe the precursor to all diseases, right? But stress, what is stress? I'm saying that I am in conflict with my current circumstance. I don't want things to be the way they are, which is I use the word resistance. I'm in resistance with what that person said. I'm in resistance with the way my bank account is. I'm in resistance with the way that my boss deals with things. I get it. I'm not saying any of them are ideal. I'm not saying that you want them. But your resistance to the way life is massively futile, and it is the precursor to the dis-ease psychologically and emotionally that then manifests eventually physiologically. If you can find harmony, I tell people I have an intimate relationship with reality. I am at peace with what is. It doesn't mean that it's ideal. I may be working on things to improve, but I'm not in conflict with the way that life is currently, and for that reason, my experience is freedom and peace.
Yeah. I mean, stress is the big one. You know, it really is. You may or may not know the World Health Organization calls stress the health epidemic of the 21st century. Up to 90% is thought of what a doctor like me sees in any given day is in some way related to stress. These are the two of the big reasons why my last book is all about stress, basically what it is, where it lives, what we can do about it.
Yeah.
And I remember when sitting down to write it and trying to sort of order my thoughts. And as you know, you're going through the process of writing a book. One of the most beautiful things about it is that you can have all these thoughts, all the variety of thoughts in your head and in your mind. But actually writing a book means you've got to systematize them. You've got to put them into some sort of order, some sort of coherent structure where it makes sense. Mm-hmm. And although it can be challenging at times, it's one of the most fulfilling experiences I've had is writing books for sure.
Yeah.
And I started off the first quarter of that book, not about talking about nature or meditation or breathing, as helpful as I think those things are. I covered them all.
Yeah.
I spent the first quarter of the book talking about meaning and purpose.
Yeah, beautiful.
Because I felt that this is such, it's about what you said about living that life where you accept the way things are, where you have a reason to get up, where you are creating, you are aspiring, it is incredible. And I think at the heart of everything really is stress. At the heart of everything is that slight feeling of I am not safe. I might be in danger.
Yes, that's the threat response.
It's a threat response. And we can see that from our email inbox these days. We can see it on social media. We can see it everywhere. And two things I'd just like to finish off on is you mentioned when we were talking about the potential for people to maybe have an emotional reaction to various parts of this podcast, saying, well, if they do, that's their reality. I'm okay with that because my job is not to make them happy.
Right.
I really like that because a big shift, I don't know if it's a shift or not, but I think I think Hollywood, and it feels quite apt to be saying this here for me being here in California, and just a few miles, I'm sure, away from Hollywood, that I think Hollywood has created stories and narratives and about romance and about what being in a loving relationship is and how two people complete each other and make each other happy.
Yeah.
I think it's all BS. And what I mean by that is, I feel that my wife and I are in a fantastic place these days.
Yeah.
And I think a large part of that is because we are not our jobs are not to make each other happy.
No.
We don't complete each other. Right. We're complete by ourselves. Mm-hmm. We find happiness and meaning ourselves. Yeah. And when we do that, the better we can be at that, the better our relationship is. But when I think a common misconception out there is that people around us, whether it's our kids, mm-hmm. whether it's our partner, whether it's our friends, they complete us.
Yes.
What do you think to that?
I mean, 100%. It's funny, because that's that famous line with the first movie that I worked with Tom on was Jerry Maguire, and he says, "You complete me." Now, for celluloid purposes, when you're watching on a screen, it certainly appeals to the romantics. I'm a hopeless romantic. I love love. I love companionship. But yes, it's a disservice to the truth as far as I'm concerned, which is it implies as you're not complete without somebody else. And that is a lie. So when people are under the impression that, yes, somebody else or something else, it could be something, right? It could be money, it could be status, it could be a job title, that they think that's going to complete me, then what you're actually reinforcing is that there's something slightly off about me, and that's a lie. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we could talk about, I love talking about relationships. I help a lot of couples. I help a lot of people with their relationships. And most people don't know how to relate because they're relating, like you kindly shared earlier in this conversation, from a place of survival. You morphed yourself, was your form of relating to a group to get the feeling of being belonging and wanted, which was really a compensation for the relationship you had with yourself, which is you weren't wanted. Once you reconcile that, you became free. You actually now can relate to people because you get to listen. You get to be with other people. That's why most relationships don't work, because people don't listen to each other. They react to one another. You have to play the role of the ambassador that you were when you first met, because that's now what they're expecting, and vice versa. And it becomes exhausting to try and sustain that versus just being you, being loved, warts and all, as the expression is, like with all your imperfections. No one's perfect. We're all human. We're all flawed, and that's part of our beauty. But if we can accept that with ourselves, then we can accept that with others. And that to me that's love. Love, as I said earlier, does not judge between forms. It just doesn't.
Peter, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. This podcast is called Feel Better, Live More.
Yeah.
It is relatively obvious on certain levels, but I have seen over and over again that when people feel better in themselves, they get more out of their lives.
Yes.
I love to leave the listeners with some hopefully simple ideas and tips that they can think about applying into their own lives immediately to start transforming the way that they feel. Now, I appreciate we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you would be open to sharing some of your top tips to people. And if you can, maybe, we didn't really cover parenting. Many people who listen to this are parents.
Yeah.
And I just think you have so much wisdom, and you can probably share some final pieces of that wisdom that are going to help the listeners.
Okay. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind intuitively, I'm just going to trust, is slow down. Just for everybody to slow down. The world is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, metaphorically, and people are just rushing around. And invariably, it's for this idealized future that everyone's chasing. So to the point earlier, we're under the impression that this one-day phenomenon is when I'm going to have the perfect body, the right relationship, enough money, yada, yada, yada. And what we're doing is we're sort of perpetually pushing away our feeling better, because I'm saying, well, that's where it's all going to work out, but right now it's not so good. So I would say embrace life for what it is, embrace yourself for who you are, and embrace others for who they are. I use the expression, everybody's a masterpiece and yet a work in progress. So allow people to be who they are, whilst we can still be committed to becoming better versions of ourselves. That is the process of enlightenment, evolving beyond our current constraints. So slowing down, breathing. I mean, it might seem fundamentally obvious, but how many people are disconnected from their breath? Even as I said the word, you took a deeper breath. Hopefully people, as they hear that, they might go, oh my gosh, I haven't checked in with my own breathing patterns. To slow that down, there's a strong correlation between our breathing patterns and our mind, meditation. So that would be probably the first tip, is just smell the roses, as cliche as that sounds. Secondly, again, I said love is my favorite topic. Be gentle with yourself and be gentle with others. Everybody, including ourselves, is doing the best we can. We're all functioning within our own blind spots, our own conditioning, our own programming. I explained on another podcast, to judge somebody is completely nonsensical. Because if you had their DNA and you were raised by their parents and you went to the school that they went to and you got the results that they had and you had the failings that they had and you had the triumphs they had, you had the heartbreak they had and the relationships and the jobs and the firing, everything that a human had been through, then whatever you're judging them for at that moment, you would be doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
If you really, that's just physics. That's just logic. That's not me just trying to be like, philanthropic and like, oh, let's just love her. No, it just makes no sense to judge anyone. So, slow down, connect with your breathing, and just remove judgment as much as you can, because it is one of the greatest precursors to sickness, to volatility, to disharmony, to discontent, is I'm saying that they and life shouldn't be the way it is. And that is a disservice to everything that you're a stand for, feeling better. You can't feel better if you're saying that everything is wrong.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the memo that that person is in charge of the universe. The audacity, if you think about it, of the ego that thinks it knows how other people should behave and how life should be. I would never take on that responsibility or be so audacious to think that I know how somebody else should be driving on the freeway. So
it's one of the most freeing things that has been for me to really understand that if you were that other person, you would be acting in exactly the same way as they do.
And that's not condoning the behavior.
No.
It doesn't mean that their behavior is optimal. It's someone you might love who truly is struggling with alcoholism or, some sort of addiction, and you want them to be well. And so we're not condoning the behavior, but at least meet them. And let's tie it up here, because this ties in beautifully. It's actually in Maui, and a woman asked me this question because this buys into, or at least relates to, your parenting question. She said, how do I help my son, who at the time I think she said is like 18, 19, and he's got an older son, and he said, I'm just never going to be as good as Johnny. And so the mother, because she's a mother and she loves her son, and said, no. And she came in with all the things that you would expect a mother to say. You're amazing and you're so good at this and blah, blah, blah. So she was saying all of the things that on the surface sound good. But to the point that I made earlier, she wasn't honoring his reality. What he was saying is, I don't feel as good as my brother. Now, I'm not saying that we want to leave him hanging out there, but at least meet him there. I understand. Like, why do you think you feel that way? Get into their world versus reinforcing and instructing. No, you're this. Basically, what that kid was left with is, you're not listening to me.
Yeah.
So as a parent, your greatest gift is listening to what your kid said versus telling them what you feel. Now, you can get to that. Of course, she worked with the kid and said, where did that happen? Now you get into his world. He feels loved by the parent, which is actually going to make him feel just as good as Johnny, who's whatever, the great athlete or whatever he thinks that makes him less than. So now the parent listening is actually affording that child love, because they're saying, I care about you enough to listen to your reality. I might not agree with it, and I'm going to help you break out of it. So then to ask, well, where did that happen? Oh, well, Johnny did this. And, oh, okay. So similar to what I did with you, I'd say, but I understand, honey, that would make you feel less than. But can I ask you, does that really mean that you're never going to be as good as your brother? See, now you get into their world and let them answer the question. So that to me would be a parenting tip. Parenting is a whole nother topic. But even that, hopefully parents will understand. Listening to your children is one of the greatest gifts you can give them, because more often than not, what does a kid say? Why? Mummy. It's a repetitive stream of conversation because the parent's not actually present with their kid.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this conversation, there's loads more like it on my channel. Please do press subscribe and hit that bell. Now, back to the conversation.
It's not one of the biggest obstacles to this for people. Mm-hmm. The fast pace of 21st century living. And why I say that is because if you're always rushing around, if you're always in a chronic state of overwhelm, and I've got too many things to do, I can't do this, can't do that. You're rushing all the time. You never think you've got any time for yourself.
Yeah.
It's very hard then to take time to be compassionate for other people if you haven't got time to even be compassionate for yourself. And one of my big recommendations to people is that, again, I think it's a necessary part of self-care on a daily basis. You need some alone time. You need some time to yourself where you can just sit with yourself. You can
not necessarily sit with yourself and hide on Instagram, but sit with yourself. So these feelings come up to the surface. You can think about them, you can talk about them, you can write them down, something. And if you don't have that, I think it's very hard to move to the next stage. I mean, what would you say to that?
No, I think it's great. I mean, the comment that's coming, or the expression that's coming to mind is slow down. And that's easier said than done. But again, I make the point that everyone's in a hurry to get to a future where one day they don't have to be in a hurry. You know, if you just look at that, right? It's like people are working in jobs they don't enjoy, you know, to hopefully have sufficient money one day so that they can relax and have fun. But, you know, to what degree could we incorporate some of that now and actually take a breath? Like quite literally, just stop and breathe for a minute, because it is so conditioned within us to survive. So your point about the hurry, the urgency, this competitive nature of society, it's a survival paradigm. And to me, real success is where I can be at peace in the midst of chaos. And that's got nothing to do with my bank account. It's got nothing to do with, you know, whoever's on my arm as a beautiful man or a beautiful woman, or the title on my business card. It's, can I be comfortable in my own skin, regardless of what's going on around me? And that to me is a human being who's found the true definition of success. Because I'm blessed to work with people who have more money than time, and they would traditionally be seen as the most successful because of their net worth. Yet, if you were to understand the inner mechanics of their feelings and their thoughts and their relationships, you would see somebody who's quite broken and who's very upset and is on all sorts of medication and doesn't know how to feel compassion for their partner, and certainly doesn't feel loved by anybody. So is that really success, or is that just somebody who's got a lot of cash? So I think it's the opportunity to redefine, what does it mean to be a successful human being? And this is why I talk about this work, because it's not this linear track of one day future scenarios of when I have, right, fill in the blank, enough money, the best body, the right partner, the bigger home, the best job, the blah, blah, blah. That is this perpetual waiting game, which is saying that my happiness, my freedom, and my peace are perennially ahead of me. But if you just understand that, then you have to be at some state in a mild state of dis-ease or frustration or lack of contentment, because the way your brain is conditioning your relationship to life is that what I want is in the future. So that speaks to my lack of contentment today. And what I'm inviting people to consider is that you're always where you are, you're never in your future. I'm not saying don't have goals and aspirations, I have many, but I have an intimate relationship with life and the way it is right now, and I'm fully content with the way things are, whilst still being committed to things that I'm excited to create. But, you know, having been involved with many athletes, I think one of the things that hit so many people hard, and it certainly did me, is the Kobe Bryant death. And like, here's somebody who is literally so full of life, and his legacy is beyond in terms of what he's accomplished from the just within his sport, but then like he'd become an Academy Award winner because of his storytelling and his books, and obviously who he was as a father. And here's somebody who we could argue is at the prime of their own life, and then just like my dad, like he went to work one day and he never came back, right, because of the Zeebrugge disaster. And so likewise here for his family and all the families that were involved on that helicopter, it seems maybe trite to say, but we just don't know how long we've got. So rather than hoping and wishing for this aspirational future where we think we're going to be happy, what about if you could just consider the possibility of being happy today? And even the Declaration of Independence over here talks about the pursuit of happiness, you know, and I think I even said it on your podcast. It's become very viral. One of my quotes, I say, true happiness is the absence of the search for happiness. And that gives an entirely different relationship to time. That I'm here right now with you in this conversation, and there's nothing quote unquote wrong in my life. I'm not worried about where do I have to be next, or what am I going to, or what are people going to think about what I'm saying. Then I wouldn't be in the moment with you. I would be in my own mind. And I feel that is something that people lack. If they could just slow down enough to go, wait a minute, is my life truly in danger? Or is that just my perception? Is it really a life-threatening situation, or is it just the way it feels? And could I just for a minute sit quietly, take a few deep breaths, listen to the person I'm with, who invariably is going to be a loved one of some form, and actually not feel the need to react or control or manipulate or get somewhere? That's real relief for people.
some of the themes that have just come up, I wonder if we could apply to something specific like obesity.
Okay,
right?
Sure.
And what I mean by that is, often we think, we're going to be happy when we've got that body. You know, when I've lost this amount of weight, things are going to be great. I'm going to be able to fit into this, pair of clothes. I'm going to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And obesity is so widespread these days, both in the UK and certainly here in America for sure.
Yeah, worldwide. Yeah.
And we're not really making inroads into obesity.
Yeah.
And I think there's many reasons for that. And I've been trying to create my own framework for obesity recently. I'm sort of playing around with a few ideas based upon my experience and what I see. And so there's a couple of things I just want to touch on with you based upon your work that I think might be useful. So a lot of people who are trying to lose weight, a lot of my patients have said to me, when this happens, I'll be able to do A, B, and C. So this is this whole idea that I can't be happy now.
Yes.
I will be happy in the future when I've lost the weight, without realizing that this unhappiness with the way things currently are is going to make it much harder for them to actually get to that destination in the first place. I want to really touch on that with you.
Yeah.
I want to touch on, with respect to weight loss, I want to touch on even the whole idea of language. I mean, we discussed this last time about language and the context of maybe depression.
Yeah.
But I think, with obesity, it's also very important, if you think or you say, I am fat or I am obese, that is defining yourself by a certain label. I think I want to expand on that with you.
Yeah.
And the third stream, I think, around weight loss and obesity, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think it's such a common problem.
Yeah.
It's let me rephrase that. It's a common issue that people are seeking help with. A lot of people would like to lose what they consider to be their excess weight.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just think the mechanisms we've got for that, the processes for that are unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
So that third component was, and this is a question actually that when I told my audience that I was interviewing you again, a lot of people came up with questions that were really excited, Amazing. So many questions. But one of them was about emotional eating.
Yes.
And those three, they're quite separate, but they all come under the umbrella of certainly obesity.
Yeah.
I guess you would widen that out even further because they're the same principles that apply to anything. But I wonder how you could dissect some of that.
No, I think it's a beautiful question, and it's certainly an epidemic worldwide, right? Not just here in the UK. So I use the expression emotional obesity as a precursor to physiological or physical obesity. Now, what does that speak to? Similar to what I was saying about the mother who wasn't listening to her son. There's something unexpressed. If something's unexpressed, then it is accumulating. So if we look at that energy in Ayurveda, which is part of my work, and for people who aren't familiar, it's sort of an Indian healing methodology, which is akin to Chinese medicine. It looks at elements, and it's in Ayurvedic terms, it's part of the Vedas, which is associated with yoga, just to give a context. So there's something called samprapti, which is a word that speaks to the 6 stages of disease. And it's a beautiful system, as far as I'm concerned, and it certainly transformed my life. The first stage of disease is accumulation, where we accumulate. Now, within the context of Ayurveda, it's really looking at the physiology. So when we accumulate too much air element or fire element or earth and water element, there's going to be an imbalance. So that's the second stage, is now it becomes aggravating. So let's take one example. If somebody has too much heat, they have spicy food, alcohol, stressful situations. There's too much heat in the system. It's accumulating. The aggravation will be now they start to get sour belching, acid reflux, heartburn, and then it will start to spread as the third stage. Now, we don't need to go through the whole system, but the point is it all starts with accumulation. So now if we look at our, dear human friends out there who are struggling with a weight accumulation, my assertion through my lens is what's actually happened is they've accumulated a lot of trauma, emotions that haven't been expressed, and they live within the construct subconsciously, usually of I don't feel loved. I don't feel loved, I don't feel accepted, or I don't feel wanted. There's some discard, which makes that human being feel completely isolated, separate from the whole. And that's a miserable place to live, and they found comfort in food. Now, that's a generalization, but a lot of people are going to be able to resonate with that. So what that will look like is, as when I was a younger child, I was made fun of. I was picked on at school, or perhaps my parents were somewhat absent because they were busy, or they were just struggling with their own things. And I never felt held as a child. And I found the comfort that I was looking for in a care provider in food instead. And food is probably the biggest drug, right? It's something that we obviously do every day. And so that became a vicious cycle where whenever I feel any sense of dis-ease, I was never given the tools or the environment to be held. And so I accumulated my own unexpressed hurt and sadness and fear, and I found comfort by just eating. So that both speaks to the emotional eating component, but also just the dynamic of how we want to, as human beings, avoid pain and seek pleasure. So both are going on there, right? So I'm in a state of pain. There's no one really around me in my environment or my family to listen, to my point earlier, and let me express and feel sad and be held where I feel comforted. So my pain has been transmuted into a pleasure that I found through substance, in this case food. And then it becomes a vicious cycle where it now speaks to the language component, which is it might have started as a feeling deep-seated of I'm inadequate, I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, that then physiologically started to be expressed as somebody who societally is now rejected, because obviously it's not good to be fat, right? You're not going to be the picked one. So now it's a vicious cycle where you're reinforcing the belief of inadequacy, and now you use language to actually misidentify with your physical form. To your point, if somebody says, I am fat or I am overweight, what they're saying is, I am this meat suit. Now it becomes very difficult because you're actually saying who I am is this. And so to try and lose this would be to lose yourself, which is impossible. It's like trying to lift yourself up by your bootstraps. So that's where it becomes insidious, right? It becomes incredibly difficult because there's the deep subconscious feelings of inadequacy and separation that then fuel the escape mechanisms to which I then become identified. And then because of even more self-judgment, I feel there's something wrong with me and I'm bad and I have to do something against that, which creates a lot of pressure and a lot of heaviness. Like if I come up to you and say, you have to do this, you're going to resist, right? Yeah. So when we're doing that to ourselves, oh, I'm a loser, I have to do this, we're creating more heaviness energetically, emotionally, and then physically in our body. So that's the cascade, right? And so how do we undo that? Well, it comes back to what I said earlier about a lot of love and compassion and acceptance, but at least undoing my association with my physical form. If I can see that who I am is an expression of life, I am the only expression of life that is me, my perspective. And as far as I'm concerned, that warrants love and acceptance. That warrants reverence. There's no other you out there. And to start to change that relationship with ourself, and they probably will need some support and help to recognize, okay, what were the breakdowns in your relationship? Where was the absence of love and acceptance as you grew up? That to me is that's the real loss that needs to happen. It's not the loss of weight, but the loss of feelings of inadequacy, the loss of the absence of love. It may seem like a segue, but I think it relates. I'm helping a client currently go through a divorce. And her conditioning was to be the nurturer and the provider. And in many regards, we could say they have 2 children together, but we've sort of recognized she kind of has 3 children by virtue of the way she relates to her husband and who he is. No slight on him, but she had become a care provider for him too. And that's why they didn't have a passionate relationship or an equal relationship. She'd got the mothering instincts for 2 children and then also a grown man. And she said, I'm really struggling with divorcing this person because of those patterns. And I said, just consider you're not divorcing him, you're divorcing the version of yourself that attracted him. Yeah. Now, if you understand that, it's so profound. And for her, it was the access to a much easier path forward because she's like, wow, like it feels like a shedding. I'm letting go of a part of me that felt it was my responsibility to take care of everybody, which was a reflection of her childhood where she had to take care of her mother because her mum was sick. And she just started to play that role even with her own husband. So she was letting go of that identity of herself, which gives her an immense amount of freedom, not thinking that she's responsible for this grown man's life, which is also a disservice to him. He's capable. He just didn't need to be with her because she took care of everything, right? So if we look at that as a comparison to somebody who's quote unquote dealing with obesity, it's not the weight they have to lose. It's the image of themselves that they're looking to shed that has got these connotations of inadequacy, of not being acceptable, of not being loved. That is the real weight loss opportunity. Because when they let go of that, they find a new sense of love and compassion for themselves, which is the precursor to a new body.
Yeah. I mean, would you encourage them to even reframe the way they say it? For example, instead of saying, I am obese or I am fat, I am someone, for example, I am someone who is currently carrying excess weight. But that's more accurate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can they start using language immediately to start changing that relationship?
100%. And I would even, I get poetic. I love to write. And, that's how I find joy and expression. I'd say who you are is an expression of pure love and pure possibility, looking through a lens of inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity, which led to a behavioral adaptation where I found comfort in food. Now, if you look at that cascade, and we come back to what did I say at the beginning? You are an expression of love and pure possibility. It is purely based on the view you have of yourself and life, that I'm not loved by society, I'm not wanted, that who I am in my relationship to myself is inadequate. That lens, it's a lens that I look through, gives me the experience of sadness, isolation, depression, hopelessness, worthlessness. From that perspective, I am going to be in a position of pain from which I found relief in food. Now, if we lift off that lens, if we remove the lie that there is something wrong with you, that you're not loved, you're not accepted, then there is relief. And in relief, I don't need to find comfort in food. So yes, to your point, they could say who I am currently is somebody who, based on my conditioning, has accumulated excess calories over time that expresses as a bigger body. That's the physics. But the why is because of the way that I view myself as somehow less than, as somehow inadequate. And that's the thing to really look at. Is it true that who you are is somehow not enough? It might feel that way. You may have expressed yourself your entire life that way, but I would assert it is not a truth. And in the absence of that self-deprecating view of yourself, if that is gone, then people feel such an immense weight loss emotionally. Like everybody I work with says, gosh, I feel so much lighter.
Yeah.
And that is an energetic / emotional precursor to then their body reflecting that.
Yeah, it's the more I think about obesity, the more I reflect on patients over the last 20 years, the more I think we've reduced the narrative around it to be simply about calories.
Yeah, it's about energy. Food, and it's not at all.
Yeah. And even within food, and people talk about hunger, but there's physical hunger, and then there's emotional hunger. Why are you eating? Like someone on that Insta story I put out to ask you questions, I think someone said, ask Peter why I can't stop eating foods in the evening that I know aren't helpful for me.
Yes.
Right? You sort of answered that because actually it's part of that story. The way I see it, the way I talk about it is that we're now using food for things that we never used to use it for. For instance, food used to be there as fuel for physical hunger. When we were really hungry, we needed fuel, we'd eat.
Yeah.
Now we eat when we're sad, when we're lonely, when we're depressed.
Yes.
When we're stressed. We eat for all kinds of other reasons now.
Yes.
And simply telling people what to eat, yes, it works for some. It does appear to work for some, certainly in the short term.
Yes.
But long term, these things never tend to last because what to eat isn't the root cause. It's why people are eating it in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's
100%.
It's I don't talk about obesity that much on the podcast. It hasn't come up for a while, but I think it's super important because it is not just about read another book to tell me what to eat.
No.
For some people, sure, I have seen ultimate. And what would you say for some people who do change what they eat and they do read and go, oh, right, it's this.
Yeah.
Would you say there's no emotional component there?
No, everybody's got an emotional component. Maybe they're a little bit more strong-willed or committed, or perhaps their degree of obesity isn't quote-unquote as drastic, and maybe they're just somebody who's very, left-brained and they just like, oh, okay, I need instructions and I'll just follow them. I think if we really break it down, what is food, right? It is a form of nourishment. And the expression I use again, I say for the most part, Westerners are overfed and undernourished. Now, that is not just about food. That is going back again to my point about relationships and how we do or don't experience love. So love is another form of nourishment. Physical touch, being held by someone, being told that, it's okay, even if somebody's feeling sad. That is a beautiful form of nourishment. And in the absence of those forms of nourishment, people are going to find, just based on their brain chemistry's impulses, some form of pleasure or nourishment. So invariably, the people that are struggling with physical reflections of excess or the first stage of disease accumulation, they're just missing those other aspects of nourishment. And it's easy for me to sit here and say these things, and I hope people understand I'm coming from love and compassion, which is, yes, you may be listening to this and you may be in this situation, and your question, your brain is saying is, yeah, but I don't have any good friends. My parents aren't there, or they estranged me when I was very young, and all I can say is, I hope you can find love and compassion for yourself. Start there, because that would be a precursor to other people showing up energetically.
How might they do that, Peter? Like, how someone hearing that go, okay, fine, how can they start doing that? Is it with daily journaling? Is it with affirmations each day, saying, I'm full of love, hope, and compassion? I am a worthy human being in front of the mirror. Is it I've seen Marissa Peers on her podcast, and she talk about, with some of her clients, she has I Am Enough. She gets them to lipstick it on their mirrors all around the house. Everywhere they go, they see I am enough, and they say I am enough.
Yeah.
I don't know, is there something practical for them that they can start showing compassion to themselves?
I mean, those are great tools. And again, I'm not much of a strategist, because I think awareness is the most important thing. Then it's practice. So to answer your question directly, yes, there are going to be things they can do. But more than anything, I want people to understand they are a unique expression of life. Like, if that person is a parent or was a parent, I often say, if you had a baby that was yours, and even if, again, you don't, but you can imagine, I don't have kids, but I can certainly imagine if I had my own child, you're obviously a dad, you understand, what would your energy be towards that child? And categorically across the spectrum, people are like, gosh, I'd just do anything for them. Now at least that person has a semblance of what does love look like? Because oftentimes we don't know what self-love looks like, because we use it, or it gets expressed in our relationship to somebody else that we care about. So sometimes what people need is just a hypothetical or a real life example of, where do I express love? And now we can tap into that, because I know how I would feel towards my own child, towards a baby. It doesn't have to be, it could be a niece, it could be a nephew, it could be your friends just had a new baby. And if I know, gosh, there's a preciousness there in that child, that is equally a reflection of who I once was as a baby, and energetically and emotionally still am. So it might not seem very practical, but there is a real life example where you can look at the beauty of a newborn baby and go, wait a minute, what does that elicit in me? Because that expression internally of that emotion is the precursor to an action that is more self-loving. Now, for that person, self-love might look like I'm not going to have that second packet of biscuits or something, right? That might be the first expression of self-love, is that if I have two traditionally in a day, two packets, I'm going to have 1.5 today. Now, to the layperson on the street who isn't struggling with obesity, they might still judge that as terrible. But no, that was a glimpse. You moved the needle in the direction of self-love. Yeah. And that's the thing that I think more people don't, need to understand that they don't, which is process, time, patience.
Yeah.
And that those qualities of patience are themselves love, right? With somebody you love, with you and your children. Maybe at times you're frustrated and you're in a hurry for something, but for the most part, you understand it's a child, and they need time to learn to ride a bike. They need time to learn how to do the mathematical equation. And we've lost that gentleness. We've lost that humanity of patience with ourselves. And I often like to do timelines. If I could see you in a year, you've got a year to work on this. And let's say somebody needs to lose 5 pounds, 5 pounds, 5 stone. Right? Yeah. So what was that, 60 pounds or whatever it is. Yeah. So it's a chunk of weight, or even if it's more. First of all, you're not going to do that overnight. What if you could look at it through a healthy lens of, okay, literally I could lose 1.5 pounds a week, maybe 2 pounds a week, and that would be considered a healthy progression. Then we reverse engineer that. So if I'm going to lose, let's say 2 pounds a week, and I've got 60 pounds to lose, I've got 30 weeks, so it's about 10 months. Now that changes for me the conversation immediately. Wow, it gives me breathing room that I'm not supposed to do this overnight. I've got 10 months to do that. So immediately I'm giving myself some compassion. I'm giving myself some time to breathe.
Rather than by the end of January, I must drop 2 dress sizes.
Yes, and it just becomes unrealistic.
Yeah.
And then so you're actually setting yourself up for more self-sabotage.
And feeds that cycle of, I failed, I'm not worthy of this,
which of course is the precursor. So again, it all comes back down to, and again, it may sound esoterical, poetic, but for me, I love turning on the internal expression of male and female expressions of love. right? And what does that mean? So like I said, if you imagine you had your own baby or you could see somebody's baby, to me, it pulls forth the expression of the quintessential mothering, unconditional love and acceptance. A mother's energy is embracing, it's nurturing, it's all holding. When the baby's crying or it breaks something, the mother's inclination is, don't worry, it's okay. Yeah. So to bring that quality, and then the father, the paternal energy is love, but with a little bit of sort of that logical commitment and something that is we're going to work towards. It's an analytical side. And I think what we tend to do is we tend to come straight in from the masculine. Like, well, what should I do? What is the strategy? And sometimes I feel, beyond sometimes, every time I feel what people need first is that feminine, it's okay. It's okay where you're at. That currently you're 2, 5, 300 pounds, it's okay. I get that you're discomforted. I get that you feel terrible, but it's okay. You are where you are. Now the person feels seen, they feel held, there's a degree of self-acceptance. Now, what would you like to do as a choice, not as a reaction? Because if we're coming from a reactive state of mind too, we're denying ourselves. We're saying, I'm not something and I need to fix myself. That is also going to be a losing proposition. Versus, I'm going to choose to take care of myself, and over a very, very realistic time frame, this is now the practical side, the masculine, I'm going to commit to what are the choices I have to make to lose 1 to 2 pounds a week. That may seem completely nominal relative to somebody's current condition, but check back with me in a year and see where I'm at. And I forgot who said it, but it was like Ernest Hemingway or somebody. They said, look, the time is going to pass anyway. Like relative, the world is going to keep moving. So you might as well do something that is good for yourself, right?
I mean, just a couple of observations there, Peter. I'm conscious that we're almost at the end of the time we have, and we still haven't covered a load of the things that I wanted to, which means we're going to have
podcast
a part 3.
Number 3.
When I'm back in LA in a few months. I wanted to touch on relationships and kids. And I think we have done a little bit, to be fair. I think we have done. And what's interesting, you mentioned before, what would your relationship be like with your kids? Regarding patience, you would be patient with them. It's really interesting that for me, as I've become more compassionate to myself, and more patient with myself, I become more patient with my kids.
Yes, of course.
And that sort of applies to relationships as well. And we didn't go in deep into relationships. No. We sort of touched on some of them. I wonder briefly, only because we're out of time. For people, and again, this is something we can go in deep next time.
Love to.
I'm sure there will be a next time. I have no doubts. But are there some sort of practical tips that people can think about in their relationships?
One word: listen. Listen. It's so misunderstood when people talk about communicating. What does usually come to mind when you say, communicate? What do you normally think of when you hear that word? Like if I'm communicating,
how do I?
Like, what is the connotation? If I'm saying, they're a good communicator, what does that normally imply?
It normally implies they're good at explaining something to someone else.
Correct. So I want to flip that around. I want to say the greatest communicators are the greatest listeners. 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? So in relationships, if this is like sort of, we're down to the last couple of minutes and there's an ultimate takeaway, is work on listening. There's no greater gift you can give a human being than to truly get their reality over there. Most people tend to react. They're not listening. So even if someone comes up and calls me an idiot, which fortunately they don't, but if from my perspective, I really that's how they viewed me and I was listening, there's no reaction on my end. There's actually just curiosity, because that's not how I view myself. So I'm kind of curious, where did you get that opinion of me? So now I get into their reality versus retaliating and say, well, screw you, you're an idiot, which is how most people relate. It's a very basic form of language, but it's because people don't listen, they react. And again, I'm going to reiterate it. There's no greater gift you can get than to truly understand, fully get somebody's view of life. They're just expressing how things look through their eyes. And what most people do is they don't get their reality. They listen from, how does their view affect me? That's how most people are listening. What is their words and what are their actions? What are the implications to me? Which is the survival mindset. That is not a relationship. Really get this. That is not a relationship with anyone else. That is a relationship with my view of my own existence, which is why most people aren't in a relationship. because they're not with the other person, they're with the other person, and how does that person threaten my view of life?
Yeah.
That's why most people are lonely, why most people's relationships aren't passionate and fulfilling and joyous, because they don't understand that a relationship has got nothing to do with my view of survival and how that person upsets me or brings me joy or they have to behave in a certain way for me to feel okay. It's rather, I'm fascinated to get to know your view of life.
Yeah.
And that would change this whole world and the way that people relate to each other like you wouldn't believe.
Language is so important.
Because it's programming.
It is programming, but many of us use language in a way.
Yeah.
And when I say many of us, I include myself. Although I feel I've improved, I still do it.
Yeah.
But I feel that language is something that we don't prioritize enough. We don't give it the seriousness it deserves. And you, for example, if someone says to you, I have anxiety or I have depression, from what I've heard you say before, I imagine you would rephrase that for them.
I would a little bit. I mean, that's at least a little bit more powerful than someone saying, I am depressed. Saying I have depression creates a little bit of space, right? Versus saying I am depressed. Can you hear the difference?
Yeah, for sure.
If I'm saying I am, then what I'm becoming associated with the feeling and the condition versus recognizing it's something that I have. Saying when we recognize it's cloudy outside, right, there's a deeper understanding that will transpire, it will change. So being able to associate our feelings, our sensations, even our sicknesses as transitory versus something that defines us. This is one of the issues I have when I help people who have addictions. When people declare themselves as whatever they like, I am an alcoholic. I get it, but I don't condone it personally. I feel it's a disservice to that human's opportunity to break free of a behavior which will need work, right? The substance abuse, whatever it might be, opioids to alcohol to even just weed and prescription drugs, these are byproducts of internal dis-ease. Like you even said, right, yourself, you didn't speak to it, but you said when you were really struggling or working too hard and stressed, you found your ways of relief or escapism, right? So when, to me, somebody comes to work with me because they have some quote unquote addiction, I'm really not that interested in the addiction, because I know that if we change the perspective somebody has of themselves, the behavioral adaptations to that will drop, and hence so will the addiction. As long as we're trying to cure the addiction, we're actually reinforcing the belief that somebody deeper down has a problem. And in my world, no one has a problem. They just have pieces of programming that maybe they're a disservice to that person, and they're inaccurate, just what we just did now. You're not wanted, right? You thought you were not wanted and you thought you'd done something wrong. In the absence of those constraints, you discover freedom. When you have that amount of freedom, you don't need substance to find escape from the peace that you're experiencing. So that's why I get specific with language, because people are very loose with language. And what people don't understand is our words create our reality. And I'm very passionate and I care immensely about people, and certainly the people I help. So I want them to be powerful in the way that they use their words, because I want people to realize their goals and aspirations. How many times on a New Year's resolution does somebody say blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah falls by the wayside 10 days later? Because they don't honor their word. They don't actually realize the power of what they're saying. It's the same as somebody saying, I'll meet you for a coffee at 2:00, and they get there at 2:10. No one died, but it shows that you don't actually have a relationship to the way that you speak. So if you can't show up for a coffee on time, based on what you said, what luck do you think you're going to have in realizing this new, startup company that you want to get going when you're saying whatever you're saying about it, because you're not going to stick to it? This is where people they give up too quickly because they don't actually honor their commitments. And it doesn't make anyone wrong. For me, I just want people to be powerful.
It sounds like it's about getting the basics right, isn't it? It's about getting that foundation right. You use the example of someone wanting to succeed in their startup.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the same as you were saying with addiction. Whatever your aspiration is, let's just wind it right back. Let's get the foundation of how you function as a human being, how you talk about yourself, how you act. Let's get that right.
Yes.
And then the downstream consequences of that, no matter what they are, no matter what you want them to be, will just fall naturally as a consequence. I guess it's like addiction. I do like Gabor's work, and I very much enjoy my conversation with him. And I also subscribe to his view that all addiction, no matter what it is, actually comes from some sort of, I think, I don't want to put words in Gabor's mouth now, but I think it's some form of childhood trauma. And he defines trauma as either bad things happen to you or not enough good things happen to you. So it's not just that stereotypical event of, I was
abused or hit.
Of course. And I clearly, I'm not trying to make light of that in any way.
No. It's tragic.
It's as if when we don't feel whole in ourselves, we then use other things to fill that hole and to fill that void. And, I've got a few addictive personality type behaviors. I'm going to change my language. I used to have certain behavioral patterns to do with various addictive tendencies. And those things didn't go away by me trying to help them go away. When I did the inner work, as I continue to do my inner work, and I start to peel away layers of the onion, and I become more secure in who I am, those things have just fallen by the wayside without me even trying.
Bingo, right? So, I tell people, you can't create the life of someone you don't yet believe yourself to be. Right. So again, this is one of my quotes that I use in my book, right? So it's like recognizing that if you're wanting to create a certain life externally, then if you don't emulate that internally in the way that you view yourself, in the way that you speak about yourself, the way that you behave, then you're, to use the English expression, you're pissing into the wind, right? It's not going to work because you're going against the grain of how you're fundamentally conditioned. I'll use a sports analogy because I think, I work with a lot of professional athletes and it's a beautiful metaphor for life. So I was hired by a very successful basketball player here. And he was struggling from the free throw. Like when one of the players gets fouled, you go to the free throw, it's a relatively easy shot. The league average is 75%. So when a guy is fouled, he goes to the free throw line, usually makes the 1-pointer, 7, 8 times out of 10. This guy's average was 35%. So, it wasn't even close to average. It was half the average. And you can imagine he was, losing sleep. It was affecting his personal relationships at home because of the stress. Crowds were starting to boo. And here's somebody who's getting paid millions of dollars. There's literally millions of fans. They're fanatical here in the States about their sports. And it was costing him a lot. He was really, really struggling. So the point about addiction and why I'm using this sports metaphor as a comparison is he had become addicted to the fact that he had a problem. So when I met him, I said, you're probably speaking to everyone you can, from players, coaches, even sports psychologists. He's like, I'm doing everything I can to fix the problem. I said, and therein lies one of your biggest obstacles, because you keep reinforcing the belief that you've got a problem. Do you remember the movie Men in Black with Will Smith, and they waved the black wand after they'd seen the aliens to wipe their memory? So I said to the guy, I said, if you had no memory, where's your problem? Just to start to give him an indicator that what he's fighting is his history. So now he goes up to the free throw line. He isn't even focused on what he's trying to accomplish, which is make the basket. He is trying to avoid his history of hurt, trauma. I'm not a big fan of the word trauma, but past failings or disappointments where we got upset. And now he's standing there literally trying to fix his history. But that's only impossible. So, I played with a guy, as you can probably imagine. I'm coming from a lot of love and compassion. He's doing the best he can. It's affecting him dramatically. But I said, once he got to see it, I used a metaphor. You're like driving a car, but the way you're driving the car is you're looking in the rearview mirror. So all you're seeing is what's behind you. And then you wonder why you keep running into shit.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, then I said to him, what if I told you that for the rest of the season, you shot league average? Let's just be, we'll be conservative. You shot 75% instead of 35, 37. His shoulders dropped. He had the biggest smile on his face. This guy's huge. He's like, 7 foot something. And he's like, that would feel amazing. I said, what I just presented to you is a future that is as real as the one you're concerned about. The difference is I recognize that as a possibility, whereas you're so busy trying to avoid your history that you're actually standing in the line in a state of anxiety, which is self-perpetuating. It's self-fulfilling. Both the futures, you're worried about one. Mine is phenomenal, or at least better. They're both made up. Why? Because we're still sitting in your house. We haven't gone anywhere. But mine elicits joy, freedom, relaxation. If you're an athlete coming from freedom, joy, and relaxation, I don't care what sport you're doing, you're going to do it better than if you're coming from tension, anxiety, and worry. That night, he had a game. He shot 6 out of 8, so that was 75%. And for the rest of the week, he shot 68%.
Way better than previous.
Almost double if you're into that kind of stuff. Yeah. Right? So what happened is, going back to the addiction, is most people are completely addicted to their history and then spending the rest of their life trying to compensate for it. Versus, what are you committed to? What's the future you're stepping into out of pure creation versus reaction? And it's a distinction I make. Most people are reactive versus creative. You feeling you had to call your wife was a reaction to the fear that you generated, thinking you were doing something wrong. There's nothing creative, there's nothing new, there's nothing passionate about that. It's you trying to protect yourself and not get into trouble, which is how most people live their lives. Again, not wrong. I have all the love and compassion.
Yeah.
But let's wake up and find so much more joy and freedom for ourselves and come from a place where we're creating an extraordinary future that we're working towards versus trying to fix a history behind us, which we can't do anything about anyway.
Yeah.
2 totally different worlds to live in.
This idea that we get addicted to the stories.
Yeah. They define us.
They do define us. And the thing for many of us is we're not even aware that we're telling ourselves those stories.
Hence, it's the subconscious to come full circle, blind spots. Yeah, and that's
exactly.
why I have all the compassion in the world. One of my lines I say, you can't be held accountable for that which you're oblivious to.
Yeah, for sure. And I hope by us having this sort of conversation, I'm hoping that people who are ready to hear this sort of information, and people might go, wait a minute, actually that resonates with me.
Yes.
And maybe that awareness is going to be the start of a cascade reaction for them to start going and exploring various things.
Yeah.
This whole story piece, it made me think of when my second season of Doctor in the House came out. Mm-hmm. So this is, returning series. I'd spent 6 months of my life pretty much 7 days a week on this, trying to help 8 families around the country with very complex problems, literally busting a gut, trying to summon every possible bit of knowledge that I've ever accumulated in my life to see how can I help these people? How can I help them, feel better so they can live more, basically.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I was really proud of the results, and it was time for the show to air. And I remember that one of the shows came out, and yes, 99 point whatever % of people were very positive, and it was great feedback. Mm-hmm. But there was a section who hammered me, like literally hammered me on Twitter. And I found it very difficult, actually. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for about a week after, actually. I couldn't understand it. I've just helped these people. I've not had to use any drugs. I've helped them just see what they can change in their own lifestyle to help improve them. And I got hammered because I'd taken unconventional methods. Now, there's a couple of pieces to this. One piece is, let's say there was a lady with fibromyalgia who was pain-free after 6 weeks. Yeah. And she had been suffering with that pain for, I think, nearly 10 years prior to that.
Yeah.
There was a section of people who would hammer me online. Yeah. And what was interesting is a lot of them had Fibro in their Twitter handle. So, Fibro Tom or Fibro Sally.
Right.
And initially I found it very hard, but then I soon turned from being frustrated to actually having compassion.
Yes.
Because what I realized is actually their whole identity has become their illness.
Yes.
And I am not judging that.
No.
I do not know what it's like to live like that, okay?
It can be very
I'm just putting that out there. And I suddenly started to go, actually, you know what? That must be too difficult to get your head round, that you've just seen on a TV show a lady suffering for years literally go pain-free in 6 weeks.
Yes.
It's almost too much of cognitive dissonance from where you are currently at to think that that is real. And therefore, the only way to deal with that is to attack me and say this was never fibromyalgia, this is nonsense, BBC are a disgrace for putting this on, what does Dr. Chatterjee do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
But once I reframed the way I viewed it and looked at this with, wait a minute, I get it. I'm totally compassionate. Amazing. Why they're doing it. It changes everything.
Yes.
And I think that was one piece of that, which is the whole identity piece and how we all, and I have been guilty.
Yeah.
And maybe I am guilty at the moment, and maybe in ways that I'm not aware of creating stories about myself. In fact, I probably am.
Yeah.
So that was one aspect. The second component there is on an individual level, and you will be picking this up. You're observing. I'm sure you are picking this up as we go. But why on earth did that bother me?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I can now see why it bothered me. It bothered me because I had insecurity.
Yes.
I was insecure in myself. And therefore, when somebody, attacks me, I take it personally.
Yes.
I feel very bad.
Yes.
And now I can reflect back and go, because I don't get, it doesn't bother me anymore on social media.
Right.
And I've realized that the reason why that is not because I'm ignoring it, but because I've started to be comfortable with who I am.
Yeah.
I've started to come at peace with who I am.
Yeah.
I don't feel this constant battle to try and create a story around me.
Yeah.
I'm just pretty cool with who I am these days.
Yeah.
And suddenly then it changes everything, because freedom is a term that I get why your gift is freedom to people, because I can't think of a better word to describe how I feel these days.
Yeah.
I just feel free.
Amazing.
And it's like, it's the positive comments don't even inflate me and my ego in a way that they might have done in the past. I just feel, it's nice to read positive comments.
Yeah.
If there's negative comments, fine. But I don't like either one of them really. Yeah. They just don't really, they bother me that much. And it's quite a nice place to be. It's a very nice place to be.
Very liberating.
I wonder whether you can unpack any of those two stories.
For sure, because even in the way that you spoke, just to keep the theme so people can really get something out of this. Like, first of all, I love where you're at. It's very liberating, right? And that's really why I do what I do. I'm not here to judge anyone. It may sound a bit woo-woo, but I genuinely come from love. I understand people are suffering. My parents died when I was young. It's not because I'm a woe is me guy, but like, I get suffering. And I was literally alone. It's like, you had a 12-year-old experience at a school. You weren't quite alone, because you're just friends. But I was literally alone. I don't think there's a worse experience for a human being to feel totally isolated, not as a psychological construct, but as a visceral, literal experience. So for that reason, there's no judgment from where I'm coming, and people are going to have their reactions even to what I'm saying today. But I would like to give you a little bit more power again, because you're doing amazing work. But even as you spoke, the words you used are inaccurate, right? So you said, I got hammered. I got hammered on Twitter, and then even people were attacking me. I get the expression, but think about it. If I'm getting hammered, which back in university,
I could always see where this is going. It's great.
Yeah, the university had a totally different connotation. I got so hammered. Right, but it may seem like I'm being a little bit pedantic, but to me it's very important to understand, because you weren't hammered. What actually happened? And just be succinct, not a big story. What actually happened? The show came out, you said 99.9%, and then the others, you said I got hammered. No, what actually happened?
They made a comment about a TV show.
Great work. You're a brilliant study. Yeah. They wrote something, whether it be on Twitter, on a bulletin board online, they wrote to the BBC. I don't know, but they said something.
All of the above.
Right. But we can really concisely put it into, they said something. They expressed themselves. And to them, that is their reality.
Agreed.
And as a human being, I always want to honor people's realities, because I don't know why they think that. I might not agree. It's not my perspective to worry whether I agree or not. I just want to understand their reality. But that is distinctly different from you got hammered.
Yeah.
Now,
that's a narrative that I'm creating.
Yes, but that was unconscious until now it's conscious. You've obviously gotten past it a little bit because you said now you feel at ease, whether they say a compliment or
sure, but still, I can when I'm telling that story the next time,
it will be more powerful.
Exactly. If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy the one I had with the former monk Jay Shetty on the simple things that you can do to train your mind. It's right there. Give it a listen and let me know what you think.
The monk mindset is about pursuing your truest goals, your truest self, and your most authentic, aligned goals.